that Xuanji presented to him as per his order. Xuanji is a subordinate of the Green Ghost? Shilian asked. Correct, General Pei Jr. replied. Xuanji passed away many hundreds of years ago. She held a grudge, but was too powerless to raise hell until just over 100 years ago, when the Green Ghost Qirong took a liking to her and took her under his wing. Only then did her spiritual powers improve by leaps and bounds. What he really meant was that the chaos Xuanji caused was not General Pei's fault, because she wasn't originally this strong. All the blame should go to the Green Ghost Qirong, since he was the one who took her under his command and gave her the power to harm humans. Everyone was already of the opinion that this sin was all General Pei's to bear, but no one said it out loud. Yet he noticed and spoke of it so openly in a reminder that it shut everyone up and made them hide their real thoughts deeper within. Shilian spoke up again. Has Mount Yujin been thoroughly inspected? What about the child spirit? This time, Wu Qing's voice rang out. He said in an indecipherable tone, Child spirit? What child spirit? Shilian thought Fu Yao had probably not reported every detail. Maybe his volunteering to help was even done in secret. So without mentioning Fu Yao, to spare him any problems, Shilian explained. When I was in the wedding sedan, I heard the giggles of a child who sang nursery rhymes as a word of caution. The two junior officials next to me didn't notice, which means that this child spirit must have remarkable powers. There were no child spirits found on Mount Yujin, Mu Qing stated. Shilian was confused. Perhaps the child spirit had specially come just to warn him. Thinking of this, Shilian was suddenly reminded of another matter that had been on his mind this entire time. He asked, Speaking of which, I met a young man who can control silver butterflies. Does anyone know who he is? The noisy communication array suddenly fell completely silent. Shilian was expecting this reaction, so he simply waited. A moment later, Lingwen asked, Your Highness, what did you just ask? Mu Qing said coldly. He just said that he met Hua Chang. Upon finally learning the name of the young man in red, Shilian felt his spirits lift inexplicably. He smiled. So he's called Hua Chang? It's a fitting name for him. The tone of Shilian's voice rendered all the officials even more speechless. Another moment passed before Lingwen cleared her throat. Your Highness, have you ever heard of the 4 calamities? Much ashamed, I only know of the 4 famous tales, Shilian thought to himself. The so-called 4 famous tales referred to the extravagant stories of the deeds of 4 gods prior to their ascension. The young lord who poured wine, the prince who pleased God, the general who snapped his sword, and the princess who slit her throat. Of course, the prince who pleased God alluded to the martial might of the crown prince of Xianle. Being ranked as the 4 famous tales did not necessarily indicate that the 4 were the strongest of the gods. It was simply because their tales were the most well-known and the most talked about. Shilian had always been slow on the uptake when it came to news from the outside world. He could even be said to be out of touch with the outside world and ignorant of the state of affairs. He had only known about the 4 famous tales because he was one of the 4. The 4 calamities was something that probably grew popular later, but Shilian had never heard of it before. Since it included the word calamity, it couldn't be anything good. Much ashamed, but I've never heard of them. Who are the 4 calamities? Shilian asked. Mu Qing said coldly, Your Highness walked the mortal realm for hundreds of years, and yet you are so ill-informed. I'm really curious to know what you've been doing this whole time. Eating, sleeping, busking, collecting junk. Shilian smiled. It's not easy being a mortal. There's plenty of things to busy myself with, and they are all complicated. It's not easier than being a heavenly official. Lingwen spoke up. Please remember, Your Highness, the 4 calamities are ship sinking black water, Night Touring Green Lantern, White Clothed Calamity, and Crimson Rain Sought Flower. They are the 4 ghost kings of the ghost realm, causing endless headaches to all in the heavenly realm. Humans become gods when they ascend, and ghosts when they fall. The gods created heaven for them to reside in, drawing a clear boundary between themselves and mortals. They watched from above and ruled from beyond reach. The ghost realm, on the other hand, was not separated from the mortal realm. Monsters, demons, ghosts, and mortals shared one earth. Some ghosts hid in the darkness, and some pretended to be humans as they walked amongst the people and roamed the mortal realm in the skies. Ling Wen continued, "Ship sinking black water refers to a water ghoul. Although he has reached supreme status, he's fairly low-key and rarely starts any trouble. Not many have seen him before, so we won't mind him for now. Night Touring Green Lantern refers to that vulgar, corpse-hanging green ghost, Chi Rong. He's the only one of the 4 not yet a supreme. He's probably included because he's always causing trouble and it's really annoying. Or maybe because 4 names are easier to remember, so he's just there to pad the numbers. He's also insignificant. The White Clothed Calamity should be someone your highness is familiar with. He's also known as White No-Face. Hearing the name, Shirlian, who was sitting on the stone bridge, suddenly felt a stab of pain in his heart spread all over his body. His hands began to shake, and he unconsciously folded them into fists. Of course, he was familiar. They say that when a supreme is born, it could destroy an entire nation and throw the world into chaos. The first country that White No-Face destroyed was Shanle. Shirlian remained silent, and Ling Wen continued. Anyway, White No-Face is already defeated. Even if he still exists somewhere in this world, he'd be the last person anyone would expect to steal the limelight. Your Highness, the silver butterflies you saw at Mount Eugen are also called wraith butterflies. Their master is the last of the 4 and the one the world does not want to incur the wrath of. Crimson Rain Sword Flower, Hua Chang. In the heavens, notoriety is the word to describe the heavenly martial emperor and the crown prince of Shanle. Although the meaning of notoriety was completely different for the 2, the word still resonated equally. However, in the ghost realm, there was only one worthy to be called notorious, and that was Hua Chang. If you wanted to learn about a god, simply walk into his temple and take a look at the way he was dressed and the weapons he wielded, and you'd more or less understand him. If you wanted to know more, simply listen to folk tales, plays, and stories passed down by word of mouth. A god's mortal past and deeds were well documented. Ghosts, on the other hand, not so much. The kind of person that they were when they were still alive and their appearance at present were all a mystery. The name Hua Chang was very obviously fake, and his appearance was most likely fake too. In the rumors, he was sometimes a twisted boy given to capricious mood changes, sometimes a gentle and elegant, handsome young man, and sometimes a gorgeous seductress with a vicious, deceptive heart. Anything goes. As for his true self, the only thing one could be sure of was that he dressed in red and often appeared during a bloodbath with silver butterflies questing between his sleeves. And when it came to Hua Chang's backstory, there were endless different versions. Some say he was born crippled, without a right eye, and was bullied and humiliated since birth, so he was filled with hatred for the world. Some say he was a young soldier who died in a lost battle for his country, and later came to walk the earth in resentment. Some say he was a fool who was tormented by the death of his love. Some even say that he was a monster. In the most outrageous version, supposedly, only supposedly, Hua Chang ascended and became a god, but immediately jumped back down on his own and became a ghost. But this was merely a version that wasn't widespread. No one knew if it was true or false, and not many believed it. It had to be false, though. Even if it was true, it would be a complete embarrassment for the heavens, that someone would rather ditch their heavenly official role to become a ghost. Either way, the more diverse the stories were, the more mystery he was shrouded in. There were also many reasons for the gods to fear Hua Chang. For example, his behavior was unpredictable. Sometimes he would carry out a massacre in cold blood, and sometimes he would do odd acts of kindness. He also wielded a great deal of influence in the mortal realm and had legions of followers. That's right, mortals worshipped gods to ask for blessings and protection so that they could escape the evils from the ghost realm, and this was how the gods came to gain plenty of followers. Yet Hua Chang, a ghost, had such a large following on earth that he could influence the world single-handedly. Here was a story that must be told. When Hua Chang first appeared, he did something notorious. He openly challenged 35 heavenly officials. The challenge was to spar with the martial gods and debate with the civil gods. 33 of the 35 thought it was hilarious, but were also infuriated enough to take up his challenge, thinking that they could join forces to teach this little devil a thing or two. The first to step up to the plate were the martial gods. The martial gods were the strongest of the heavenly officials. Each had plenty of believers, and they were all powerful. In the face of a newborn ghost, it was a sure win. Instead, it turned out to be a complete annihilation. Even their weapons were completely smashed into pieces by Hua Chang's freakish scimitar. It was only after the battle that they found out that Hua Chang was born of Mount Tonglu. Mount Tonglu was a volcano. What was significant was that there is a city in the mountains called Gu. The city of Gu wasn't a place where people cultivated poison, but rather the city itself was a great venom. Every few hundred years, tens of thousands of ghosts descended upon the city of Gu to butcher each other until at last only one remained, and thus formed the venom. It usually ended in complete elimination, but those who were capable enough to make it out alive would emerge as ghost kings. Only 2 such ghosts had ever made it out of the city of Gu in these few hundreds of years, and as expected, those 2 both became the well-known calamities. Hua Chang was such a ghost king. After the defeat of the martial gods, it came time for the civil gods to rise to the challenge. Surely Hua Chang could fight, but not debate? Unfortunately for the civil gods, they could not defeat him. Hua Chang could recite the classics and debate the moderns. He was sometimes polite, sometimes vicious, sometimes stubborn, sometimes incisive, and sometimes quibbling. He was truly a great speaker of sophistication and bullshit. He verbally abused the civil gods from top to bottom, past to present, and infuriated them so much that the waterfall of blood they coughed out washed the skies red. Hua Chang gained fame overnight. What was truly frightening, however, was that after the challenge, Hua Chang demanded that all 33 officials make good on their word. Before the challenge, it was decided that if Hua Chang were to lose, he would offer up his own ashes. If the officials were to lose, they must descend from the heavens and return to being mortals. If it wasn't for his arrogant attitude and his decisive stake and the conviction of the 33 officials that they would not lose, then they would never have accepted such terms. In the end, all 33 gods ate their own words, and no one honored the terms. It was humiliating to break their promise, but when they thought about it, if only one of them was defeated, it'd be an embarrassment. If all of them were defeated and humiliated, then no one would lose face. They could even turn around and mock the other party. So they all came to a tacit understanding to pretend that nothing had happened. Mortals were forgetful anyway, and they would forget this in 50 years or so. They were not wrong about the mortals, but they were wrong about Hua Chang. The gods refused to fulfill their promises, then that was fine. He would give them a hand. So Hua Chang burnt every single temple and every single shrine of all 33 gods. This was the stuff of nightmares for all the gods in the heavens. The red-clad ghosts burning of the 33 martial and civil gods' temples. Temples and followers were the main source of power for heavenly officials. Where would followers go to pray if there were no temples? If they didn't pray, then there wouldn't be merits. The massive loss of temples and merits greatly crippled the heavens. To rebuild would take at least 100 years, and even then it wouldn't be the same as before. This was a catastrophe greater than passing one's own predetermined heavenly calamity. The number of temples and shrines of these heavenly officials combined were at least tens of thousands, but Hua Chang managed to burn them all in one night. How? No one knew, but he did it. He was truly insane. The gods cried foul to the heavenly martial emperor, but there was nothing he could do. The heavenly officials themselves had accepted the challenge and the terms, and Hua Chang was cunning enough to only destroy temples without hurting anyone. It was like he dug a hole and asked the gods to jump, and the gods themselves dug the hole bigger and then dove in. So what could they have done the way that things were now? Originally, the 33 heavenly officials wanted to show the world the defeat of this insignificant little devil. So they broadcasted the challenge in the dreams of many royals and nobles to display their strength and might before their most devout believers. But all the royals and nobles saw was their miserable defeat. When the mortals woke up, they swapped from worshipping the heavenly officials to worshipping the ghost king. The heavenly officials, who lost both their temples and believers, soon grew weaker and weaker until they were erased from existence. It wasn't until a new wave of ascensions that those empty positions were filled up. Ever since then, the name Hua Chang was feared in the heavens. Even just hearing any mention of red robes or silver butterflies brought cold sweat to many. Some feared that he would challenge them, then burn their temples if they were to incur his displeasure. Some were blackmailed into silence and inaction, and some even oddly respected him because of how wide his reach was in the mortal realm. Sometimes they even had to ask him for help in paving the way for them when they carried out their duties. Thus, the heavens feared, hated, and respected this ghost king. Amongst the 35 gods who were challenged, the two who declined were General Xuanzhen, Mu Qing, and General Nanyang, Feng Shen. They thought the challenge was beneath them and didn't care for it. Turns out it was the right decision to make. But even then, Hua Chang had not forgotten about those two. Many Zhongyuan festival patrols ended in fists and blood when both parties crossed paths with each other. And those crazy, maniacal silver butterflies left an everlasting impression on both men. Hearing this, Shirlian thought of those fluttering silver butterflies that danced around him playfully. He couldn't picture them as described in the rumors. Are they really that scary? Shirlian wondered. Aren't they rather precious? Of course, those were the words that he would never say out loud. But no wonder Nanfeng and Fuyao's faces changed when they heard about the silver butterflies. They must have had a hard time at the hands of the silver butterflies' master, together with the two generals that they served. Your Highness, did Hua Chang do anything to you? An official asked, as if Shirlian should be missing an arm or a leg. He didn't really do anything. He just... Shirlian stopped. Just what? He couldn't possibly say that Hua Chang had only just hijacked his sedan, held his hand, and strolled with him in the woods. Shirlian reorganized his thoughts and said, he broke Xuanji's spiritual array at Mount Yuzhen and took me inside. A wave of muttering swept through the crowd. After a while, an official asked, what do you all think of this? Just from the voice alone, Shirlian could imagine how the various officials looked as they shook their heads and opened their palms. Who knows? No one knows what he wants. He's just playing with us. What the hell is he thinking? No one can read that Hua Chang. Although Hua Chang had been known as the devil incarnate, Shirlian didn't think that Hua Chang was that scary. And all things considered, Shirlian had Hua Chang to thank for his help in the northern case this time around. Either way, his first mission after ascension was complete. It was predetermined that all merits from the northern case would be counted under Shirlian's name, but that old mayor was so overwhelmed with grief over the death of his daughter that he didn't actually remember to recompense prayers until much later, and all the merits were discounted. Yet somehow, a little bit here, a little bit there, and a lot of oversight everywhere, Shirlian was somehow able to repay the 8,880,000 merits. Shirlian was at last debt-free. Feeling light and high-spirited, Shirlian decided he'd now focus on being a good god, and it would be great if he could make acquaintances or friends with the other heavenly officials. Although the Heavenly Court communication array was generally peaceful, it would turn boisterous once things got busy. Sometimes, if an official was feeling good or had encountered something interesting, they'd share it in the array, and there'd be merriment. Although Shirlian didn't recognize most of the voices, he would listen silently, but he couldn't always remain invisible. After a while, he'd randomly join the conversation. That's really quite interesting. I read this pleasant verse in passing, and I thought I'd share it with everyone. Here's an effective cure for back and leg pains. Thought I'd share with everyone. Unfortunately, every time he'd share these mindfully selected, physically and mentally beneficial tips, the communication array would go silent. Until finally, Lingwen couldn't take it anymore and told him privately, "Your Highness, the things you're sharing in the communication array are nice, but even those who are hundreds of years older than you wouldn't share those kinds of things." Shirlian felt a little depressed. He wasn't even that old, so how did he end up becoming the old man amongst the heavenly officials who couldn't keep up with the trending topics of the youngsters? Probably because he'd been away for too long and had always lived a solitary life without a care for the outside world. Alas, it couldn't be helped, so whatever. He gave up and became less depressed. But there was another problem. Until now, there were still no new shrines built for him in the mortal realm. Maybe there were, but the heavens hadn't found them yet, so there weren't any records. Even the old lords of the ground and soil had shrines. As a formerly ascended official, one of the 3 times at that, having neither shrine nor temple nor followers was pretty awkward. But as awkward as it was only other heavenly officials who felt awkward for him. Shirlian personally thought it wasn't that bad. One day, on a whim, he suddenly thought, if no one worships me, I'll just build my own shrine. No one knew how to respond to this. What kind of god would build his own temple to worship himself? It was pure tragedy at this point. No matter, Shirlian was used to receiving awkward silence the moment he spoke, and thought amusing himself wasn't anyone's business anyway. It would make for an entertaining anecdote. So he jumped back to the mortal realm. This time he landed in a small village in the mountains called Pucci. Rather than a village, it was more like a hillside hamlet. With green trees and clear waters, it was a pleasant country scene with continuous stretches of rice paddies. With such beautiful scenery, Shirlian thought that he landed in a really good place this time. There was a small dilapidated shack on a hill, and upon asking around, Shirlian learned that it was a decrepit place that no one lived in anymore. Once in a while, a vagrant would sleep a night in it, so the villagers told him to make himself at home. Well, wasn't that just perfect for him? Shirlian walked towards the shack. As Shirlian walked closer, he realized that the shack looked decrepit from afar, but was literally crumbling upon closer inspection. 2 of the 4 columns that held up the rectangle-shaped shack were probably rotted through. When the wind blew, the entire shack would shake and creak, possibly ready to collapse at any time. but it was still within Shirley's range of acceptance. He went in for a look and began to tidy up the place. The villagers were quite surprised to see that someone was actually going to settle in that shack, and all came to check Shirley out. They gave Shirley a huge, warm welcome. Not only did they donate a broom to help him with cleaning and watched as he swept until he was covered in dust, they even gave him a basket of freshly picked water chestnuts. With their skin peeled off, the water chestnuts were white and crisp, fresh and juicy. Shirley squatted in front of the doorsteps and munched on his water chestnuts. He then put his hands together, thankful for this blessing. He decided to call this place Poochie Shrine. Poochie Shrine already had a table inside that could be used as the altar after a couple of wipe downs. Shirley busied himself with cleaning this and that, and the villagers soon realized that this young man was building a shrine of sorts. Curiosity overtook them, and they questioned him. "Which god are you going to worship?" Shirley cleared his throat and said, "Yes, this shrine will be for the Prince of Shanle." Everyone's face went blank. "Who is that?" Shirley replied, I don't know either. He's a prince, I think." "Oh, so what does he do?" "He probably watches over you and keeps you safe, while collecting junk in passing." The villagers asked excitedly, "Then does this prince oversee the blessing of wealth?" "It'd be pretty good if you don't get blessed into debt," Shirley thought to himself and gently replied, "I'm afraid not." The crowd started throwing suggestions at him. "Why not worship the watermaster? For wealth, it'll bring in good money." "What about Ling Wenjun? Then maybe our village will produce a scholar." A girl shyly offered, What about? Shirley maintained his smile. "What about?" "General Zhu Yang," she completed. If Shirley really built a Zhu Yang shrine, Feng Shen would probably shoot him dead on the spot with an arrow. After roughly cleaning his shrine, all that was left that Shirley needed were an incense burner, some fortune shakers, and other miscellaneous sundries. But Shirley forgot the most important thing, the statue of a god. He put on his bamboo hat and stepped foot out the door. Oh yeah, there was no door either. He pondered for a moment. This shack definitely had to be repaired. And so Shirley wrote and put out a sign out front. "Please kindly donate to the renovation of the shrine for the accumulation of good merits." Shirley went on his little journey and entered town. To do what? To eat and to do what he did best. In fairy tales, gods didn't need to eat, but in truth it was hard to say. The Almighty could certainly extract and absorb the necessary spiritual energy directly from sunshine and rain dew. But the problem was, it wasn't a matter of ability, but rather, why would you? Some gods, due to their cultivation methods, required clean internal organs and could not touch even a drop of mortal grease. If they were to ingest mortal sustenance, it would be as if they had food poisoning, and they would get diarrhea. Thus, they would only ingest cleanly grown spiritual fruits or magical beasts that had life-prolonging and power-strengthening effects. Shirley didn't have those problems. With the cursed collar on, he was no different than a mortal. He could eat anything, and through experience, nothing he ate could kill him either. Even if it was a bun that had been set aside for over a month, or a cake that had gone moldy, he could eat it all without harm. With such a body, he could pretty much get by with just collecting junk. In comparison, building a shrine cost him money, while collecting junk made him money. So ultimately, truly, collecting junk was better than ascension. Shirley had the looks and grace of a saint, so he got the upper hand when collecting junk. It took him almost no time to collect a giant bag of scraps. On his way back, he saw an old ox cart that was piled high with hay. The cart seemed to look like one he saw before from Poochie village, so it should be going in the same direction as him. He asked for a ride, and the cart driver tilted his chin to signal him to get on. Carrying a big bundle of junk, Shirley climbed on to take a seat. It was only when he settled down that he realized that there was someone else lying on the other side of the tall stack of hay. This person, whose upper body was hidden behind the hay, had his left leg up over his right. It seemed as though he was lying there with his arms pillowing behind his head, taking a rest. He looked so carefree and at ease that it made Shirley a little envious. That tight pair of black boots on a pair of long legs was a sight pleasing to the eyes, and it reminded Shirley of a different pair that walked with him at Mount Eugen. Shirley could not help but sneak several more looks to confirm that there were no silver chains on those boots, which seemed to be made of some animal's pelt. This is probably the son of some aristocrat coming out to play, he thought. The cart shook as it drove. Shirley pushed back his bamboo hat and took out a scroll to read. He didn't really care for worldly affairs, but after having created too many awkward situations, he figured he'd better study up a bit. The cart rattled and time passed. Looking up, they were traversing through a maple grove, a sea of flaming red in a field of green. The rustic charm of the mountainous countryside, with fresh grass that refreshed the mind, was extremely intoxicating. But Shirley could not help but give a slight start. A long time ago in his youth, when he cultivated at the Royal Holy Pavilion, the entire mountain of maple was like this, shimmering like gold, intense like fire. The unforgettable sight before him now inevitably took him on a trip down memory lane. Shirley watched for a long time before looking down at the scroll. The first few lines on the scroll were thus: "The Prince of Shunler ascended thrice, once as a martial god, twice as a misfortune god, and thrice as a rubbish god." "Well, all right," Shirley said aloud. "If you think about it, a martial god is no different than a rubbish god. All gods are equal." A snicker came from behind, and a voice said, "Is that right?" The youth on the other side of the cart lazily drawled, "People naturally love saying that all gods are equal and that all beings are equal. But if that was true, then all those different gods wouldn't even exist." Shirley looked at the young boy who was still languishing there without showing any intention to get up. The boy had probably interrupted out of boredom. "You're probably right," Shirley said, and smiled. Shirley returned to his scroll and continued reading. Many believe that, as the god of misfortune, any paintings or writings of the Prince of Shunler have the powers of a curse. If placed on the back of a person or on the main entrance of a household, then the cursed person or household will run into all sorts of bad luck. It was hard to tell whether this was the description of a god or of a ghost. Shirley shook his head. He couldn't bear to read on any more about himself. It was probably better to read about the other prominent gods of today, so that he wouldn't be discourteous if he ran into them and ended up not being able to tell them apart. A villager had mentioned the Watermaster earlier, so Shirley moved on to find info about the Watermaster. The Watermaster Voodoo controls water and wealth. Most merchants have a Watermaster shrine in their stores and homes to pray for abundant wealth. Shirley thought it strange. How does the god of water relate to wealth? The youth behind the hay responded, "Merchants use the waters to transport goods, so they always pray to the Watermaster for peace and safety, promising this or that. After a while, the Watermaster became the god of wealth." A pro was giving him answers. Shirley turned around. "Really? That's interesting. The Watermaster must be very powerful then." The youth smiled mockingly. "Yeah, the infamous water tyrant." Hearing his tone, Shirley didn't think that the boy thought highly of that heavenly official. It didn't sound like he was complimenting him either. "The water tyrant?" The youth replied languidly. "It all depends on him whether a ship can sail. No offerings, no sail. That's how he received that nickname. Kinda like General Ju Young and the Sweeping General. Infamous gods usually had a nickname or two between the realms. For example, Shirley was known as the laughingstock of the three realms, the infamous freak, the jinx, the outcast, etc. Usually, it was fairly disrespectful to use those nicknames on heavenly officials. Like if anyone were to call Mu Ching the sweeping general, he'd surely fly into a rage. Shirley made a note to himself of what not to call the watermaster, and said, "I see. Thank you so much for your enlightenment." He stopped and thought that this youth was a rather intriguing conversationalist. He continued, "My friend, you look young, but you know a lot." The youth replied, "Nah, I'm just bored. I read whatever when I'm free." In the mortal realm, it was easy to find books on lore that spoke of the stories of gods and ghosts, the subjects ranging from their kindness and grudges to trivialities. Some were real and some were fake. It wasn't odd that the youth knew so much. Shirley put down his scroll. "Then, my friend, you know about the gods, but do you know about the ghosts too?" "Which ghost?" the youth asked. Shirley replied, "Crimson Rain Sought Flower. Hua-Chang." The youth chuckled and finally sat up when he heard that name. He turned around and Shirley's eyes suddenly lit up. The youth was about 16 or 17 years old. His tunic was redder than maple leaves, and his skin was white like snow. With eyes as bright as stars, he looked askance at him with a smile. He was exceptionally handsome, but there was an inexplicable hint of wildness in his looks. His hair was tied in a loose ponytail, crooked and carefree. The cart was just driving through a forest of flaming red maples, where maple leaves were dancing their way to the ground. A leaf playfully landed on the shoulder of the youth, and he blew it off softly. Then he looked up at Shirley, speaking with the shadow of a smile. "What do you want to know? Ask away." He looked as though he was bantering, but he had the inexplicable composure of an omniscient being. Though he sounded youthful, his voice was deeper than was typical for his age, pleasant to the ears. Sitting upright on the cart, Shirley watched him thoughtfully for a moment, then said, "Crimson Rain Sought Flower is quite the name. Do you know where it came from, my friend?" Out of respect, Shirley didn't say, "My little friend." The youth sat up casually, propped an arm up on a raised knee, and fixed his sleeves. He replied drolly, "Nothing major, really. Just that there was once an incident where he cleaned out the nest of another ghost, and a shower of bloody rain poured from the skies. He saw a flower that was getting battered by the bloody rain, so he stopped to shield it with his umbrella." Shirlian pictured it in his head and imagined an act of elegance under the rancid shower. He then thought about the burning of those 33 temples and laughed. Does Hua Cheng pick fights often? The youth answered, not often, depends on his mood. What was he like before death? Shirlian asked. Definitely not a good person, the youth replied. What does he look like? The youth raised his eyes to look at him when he heard the question. He tilted his head and stood up before sitting down next to Shirlian. What do you think he looks like? He turned the question on Shirlian. Seeing the youth up close, Shirlian thought that he was too handsome for words. But his beauty was deadly like a sword, sharp and mesmerizing, making it hard to look at him head on. Shirlian stared for a moment, then lowered his eyes in defeat. He turned his head slightly and continued to ask, if Hua Cheng is a big-shot ghost, I'm sure he has many forms and changes often. The youth arched his brows at Shirlian, turning away, and replied, yeah, but there are still times when he would use his real face. Of course, we're talking about the real man himself, not clones. It might be his imagination, but Shirlian thought that the distance between the two of them seemed to be a little wide, so he turned his face back around. Then, I feel his true form is probably a youth like you. The youth lifted his lips slightly. Why do you say that? Shirlian replied, no reason. You say whatever, and I think whatever. So, whatever. The youth laughed. Who knows? But he's blind in one eye. He pointed to his right eye. This one. That was nothing outrageous. Shirlian recalled one of the many backstory versions where Hua Cheng wore a black eye patch to hide that missing eye, and asked, do you know what happened to that eye? That's a question everyone wants the answer to, the youth replied. Others asked because they wanted to know what Hua Cheng's weakness was, but Shirlian asked purely out of curiosity. He didn't say anything, and the youth continued. He dug it out himself. Shirlian was taken aback. Why? A moment of madness, the youth answered. He could dig out his own eye when struck by madness. Shirlian was now more curious than ever about this Crimson Ghost King. It couldn't have been something as simple as a moment of madness, but there were probably no more details in regard to that story. Shirlian pressed on. Does Hua Cheng have any kind of weakness? Shirlian wasn't expecting the youth to have an answer. It was just a casual question. If Hua Cheng's weakness was so easily known, then whatever the rumored weakness was couldn't possibly be true. But the youth answered immediately. His ashes. If one got hold of a ghost's ashes, one could take command of said ghost. If the ghost disobeyed, then by getting rid of the ashes, the ghost would too dissolve, and its soul would disintegrate. This was common knowledge, but using it on Hua Cheng seemed fruitless. Shirlian smiled. There's probably no one who can obtain his ashes, so this weakness doesn't count. You never know, the youth said. There are circumstances where a ghost voluntarily gives away his ashes, like the bet he had with those 33 heavenly officials. Yeah, right, the youth scoffed. He didn't need to say the words for Shirlian to understand that he meant that there was no way that Hua Cheng would have lost. The youth continued. There's a custom in the ghost realm where if a ghost has chosen someone, they would entrust their ashes to that person. That was like handing over one's life to another person. Such passion, what charming tales. Shirlian excitedly said, I didn't know that the ghost realm had such a romantic practice. There is such a tradition, the youth said, but not many dare to practice it. Shirlian thought as much. It wasn't only ghosts who deceived humans. There were humans who deceived ghosts too. There must be endless tales of betrayal and abuse. Shirlian sighed. It's definitely painful to think about. To have given everything for love and to lose everything in return. The youth laughed out loud. What's there to be afraid of? If it were me, I'd have no regrets giving away my ashes, destroyed or not. Having chatted for so long, Shirley suddenly realized that they hadn't even introduced themselves. "My friend, what is your name?" he asked. The youth raised one hand over his forehead to block out the rays of the blood-red sunset and squinted his eyes as if loathing the sun. "Me? I'm the third in my family. They call me Sun Lang." He didn't say his full name, and Shirley didn't bother to probe. "My family name is Shi, and my name is Lian. Are you heading to Puchi village too?" Sun Lang laid back into the hay, put his arms behind his head, and crossed his legs. "I dunno. I have no destination in mind." It sounded as if there was a story to his words, so Shirley gently asked, "What's the matter?" Sun Lang sighed. "My parents were quarreling and kicked me out. I walked for a while, but I had nowhere to go. I almost passed out from hunger on the streets before finding a place at random to lie down." The clothes on the boy's back looked simple, but they were of high quality. With the knowledgeable way he spoke and how carefree he appeared, Shirley had long since thought that he was a boy from a wealthy family. It must be quite difficult for a respectable young man to wander so long on his own. Shirley understood that feeling. Hearing that he was hungry, Shirley searched through his sack, but only found a small, steamed bun. Good thing it hadn't yet turned hard. "Do you want it?" he asked the youth. The youth nodded, and Shirley gave him the bun. Sun Lang took a look at Shirley. "What about you?" "I'm all right. I'm not hungry yet," Shirley replied. Sun Lang pushed the bun back. "Then I'm all right too." Shirley looked at him, then split the bun in half and gave him half. "You can have half, and I will have the other half." Seeing this, Sun Lang accepted the steamed bun and started munching. Watching him sit and eat a simple bun obediently, Shirley felt like he was abusing the boy. The ox cart drove slowly over the rugged hills as the sun gradually set, and the two chatted in the back. The more they spoke, the more Shirley thought that Sun Lang to be an extraordinary youth. At such a young age, his diction and behavior were already mature and intelligent, calm and collected, as if there was nothing in the world that he didn't know, and nothing could stump him. Shirley thought that he was wise beyond his years, but still possessing the guise of youth. Shirley said that he was the shrine master of Puchi Shrine, and Sun Lang asked, "Puchi Shrine? Sounds like there are plenty of water chestnuts to eat. I like them. Which god is the shrine for?" Having gotten asked that troublesome question again, Shirley cleared his throat and said, "It's the Prince of Shanle. You probably don't know him." Sun Lang smiled, but before he could say anything, the ox cart shook violently. The two rattled within the cart, and Shirley reached to grab Sun Lang, fearing that he might fall. But just when his hand touched Sun Lang, the youth shook off his hand as if burnt. There was only a slight change in his expression, but Shirley saw it and thought, maybe this boy actually disliked him. They had had such a good time chatting all this way, but now was not the time to ponder. Shirley stood up and looked around. What's going on? The old driver responded, "I don't know. Old Huang, why aren't you moving? Go on now." The sun had set by now, and the ox cart was still deep in the woods, now filled with darkness. That old Huang ox just stood there, stubbornly refusing to move, no matter how much the driver urged it. It kept mooing, wanting to dig its head into the earth and flicking its tail like a whip. This didn't feel right. Shirley was about to jump off the cart when suddenly the old driver pointed straight ahead and screamed. Further up the road, a number of hovering green flames gathered and burned, floating through the woods. A group of white-clad figures slowly made their way toward them while holding their heads. Seeing this, Shirley cried, "Protect!" Ruya flew out from his sleeve and wrapped itself in a circle around the ox cart from above, protecting the three plus the one beast. Shirley turned back and demanded, "What day is it today?" The old driver hadn't responded, before the youth spoke up from behind. It's Zhongyuan. The middle of the 7th month, when the gates to the underworld opened. He didn't check his calendar before coming out today, and it just happened to be the Zhongyuan festival. Shulian's voice dropped. Stay close to me. We've run into evil tonight. If we go down the wrong path at the fork, we'll never return. Those figures were dressed in white prisoner garb and bore no heads. It appeared that they were newly executed criminals, each one of them holding a head in their hands. They wobbled slowly towards the ox cart as their heads buzzed in those bony arms. Shulian instructed the other two on the cart in a low voice. In a moment, when they approach, do not make a sound. Sunlang tilted his head. Gurgur, I can't believe you're a man with superpowers. He sounded greatly interested, and Shulian replied, Not really superpowers, I only know some tricks. They can't see us now, but it will be hard to say when they get close. That old cart driver's eyes were already wide with fear after seeing the flight of a silk cloth, and now that they were headless walkers, his eyes were about to roll back in terror. No, 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 no. I don't think that I can hold my voice in. Daojang, what should I do? Then there's another way too. I apologize in advance, Shulian said. He then swiftly swung his hand and tapped a point on the old man's back, and instantly the old man slumped and passed out. Shulian caught him lightly and laid him down flat on the ox cart, while he himself assumed the driver's seat. Suddenly, he sensed a strange movement behind him, and when he turned back to look, he saw that the youth had also followed after him and settled right behind his person. Shulian asked, Are you all right? Sunlang propped up his chin. Of course not. I'm scared. Although his voice didn't have a single trace of fright, Shulian still comforted him. Don't be scared. You're behind me. Nothing will harm you. That youth smiled, not saying a word. Shulian suddenly realized that the youth was actually staring at him. A moment later, it finally dawned on him that what this youth was staring at was actually the cursed shackle around his neck. This cursed shackle was like a black collar bound to the neck, completely inconcealable. It could easily cause one to make bad conjectures. Shulian pulled at his collar lightly, even though that couldn't hide anything. The skies had darkened, and that youth's expression could no longer be seen. Shulian picked up the reins to gently urge the ox. That group of ghosts in criminal garb walked over and were wanting to pass, but kept sensing that there was something blocking the middle of the road, so they all cursed up and down. What the hell is going on? Why can't we pass? Yeah, what the hell? Is it haunted? Fucking hell. We're the ones doing the haunting, right? Shulian finally calmed the ox down, and the cart silently passed by this band of headless criminal ghosts. Listening to the heads' banter, Shulian thought them rather hilarious. They were full of petty woes. Did you make a mistake? How come it feels like the one holding your head is my body? You're the one whose body grabbed the wrong head. Hurry and switch back then, you guys. How come the cut around your neck isn't clean? The executioner was a newbie. It took him 5 to 6 tries before he managed to chop my head off. Made me think that he did it on purpose. Your family probably didn't tip him well enough. Next time, don't forget to pay the guy, and he'll give you one clean chop. There is no next time. The 15th day of the 7th month was the Zhongyuan festival, the biggest festival for the ghost realm. On this day, the gates to the underworld opened, and all manner of spirits, ghosts, monsters, and demons rushed out to play. Mortals should avoid them at all costs, especially on a night like this. It was best to stay home with every door and every window shut. But Shulian had always had rotten luck. Even just drinking water, and the water could get stuck between his teeth. Even wearing holy repellent gear, ghosts would still appear, like right now. Ghost fires flared all around them. Several were playing tag. Some were expressionlessly mumbling to themselves in a corner, trying to catch the offerings and paper money burned for the afterlife by mortals. A scene like this certainly epitomized the word pandemonium. Shirley crossed through the middle, thinking that from now on he must pay more attention to the calendar when going out. Suddenly, a screech that sounded like a chicken being butchered cried out, "Oh no! Oh no! Ghosts are being murdered!" This scream made all the ghosts anxious. Where? Where are they murdering ghosts? The ghost that screeched answered, "I'm scared out of my wits. I found so many shattered ghost fires over there. They were all brutally crushed. What hostility! All shattered? Then they are truly broken beyond saving. That really is too much. Who did it? Could it be? Have monks and cultivators infiltrated us?" That band of headless people started shouting. "Now that you've mentioned it, weren't we blocked by something on the road earlier, with no way of passing? Could that have been... Where? Where was it?" "Right there." Shirley cried mentally, "Oh no." The next second, a large group of monsters, demons, and ghosts surrounded the ox cart, each of their faces savage. They said maliciously, "I smell the steaming smell of young." They couldn't hide any longer. It was already unreasonable for a live human to be crashing in on a band of ghosts on the Zhongyuan festival, as if Shirlian wanted to actually fight with such a large mob of creatures. He urged the cart and shouted, "Go!" The ox was terrified and was already stomping its hooves anxiously while it stood. Once it heard the shout, it didn't need to be ordered twice before it pulled the cart into a mad dash. Shirlian didn't forget to grab the youth sitting behind him. "Sit tight." He withdrew Ruya and conveniently whipped out the path of escape. An ox cart suddenly revealed itself amidst a circle of ghost fires and dashed out of the siege. Those green-faced, teeth-bearing, limbs-missing ghosts screeched behind the cart. "There really is a cultivator. Damn cultivator is tired of living. A live human actually dared to crash our Zhongyuan gathering. You can't blame us for anything. Get them." Shirlian was gripping onto the reins with one hand, as his other hand fumbled out a large handful of paper talismans. He threw them onto the ground. Hinder. Those were stumbling charms, excellent tools for escape. A series of small rumbling noises could be heard. With every rumble, an obstacle was set up for that band of ghosts, stalling them for a small bit of time, but only a small bit. Even having used up so many talismans, it wouldn't take half an instant's time before they caught up. Shirlian was driving the cart down the mountain path in an escape as though his bum was on fire, when suddenly he called out, "Stop!" Turns out that old ox had pulled the cart to a fork in the road. Shirlian saw that there were two pitch-black mountain paths ahead and immediately pulled the reins back. Now he had to be extra careful here. On the night of the Zhongyuan festival, sometimes when people strolled, they might discover a road that had never existed before. Such a road should never be taken, because if wrongfully walked, they would enter the ghost realm and never return. Shirlian had only just arrived in the area and didn't know which path was the right one to take. Then he remembered the large bag of junk that he had collected. The miscellaneous items he purchased earlier in the day included a fortune shaker, so he thought, why not try and shake out a fortune to decide? Thus, he fumbled for the fortune shaker and shook it in his hands with a clattering sound, mumbling as he shook. By the heaven official's blessing, no paths are bound. Every road leads to heaven. May they all be walked. The first stick left, the second stick right, will go the path with the best fortune. Just as the word left his lips, clack, clack, 2 sticks fell out of the shaker. But when he picked them up and looked, he fell silent. the worst of bad luck. Both sticks were the worst of bad luck. Both roads were perilous, so didn't this mean that they were going to die no matter what? Shirley felt a little exasperated and shook the shaker furiously once more with both hands. Dear Fortune Shaker, this is our first meeting. Why are you so heartless? I'm going to try again. Please give me some face this time. Clack, clack. 2 sticks again this time, and when he picked them up, they were both still the worst of bad luck. Can I try? Sunlung spoke up suddenly. It couldn't end up worse than his anyway, so Shirley passed the fortune shaker over. Sunlung received it with a single hand and casually gave it a shake. Out fell 2 fortune sticks, and he picked them up and handed them to Shirley without even so much as a glance. Shirley gave them a look, and they were both, amazingly, the best of good luck. He couldn't help but be awed. Since then, having reached such a state of misery, it seemed oftentimes those around him would also have their fortunes affected by his crummy luck. Who knew if that was actually true? But either way, it was a complaint that he'd hear frequently. Yet this youth wasn't affected in the least, and a casual shake could have him shake out 2 of the best fortunes. Since both fortune sticks showed the best of good luck, Shirley picked a path randomly and drove the cart as he praised sincerely. My friend, your luck is really quite good. Sunlung casually tossed the fortune shaker back and smiled. Really? I think my luck is pretty good too. It's always been so. Having heard him say, it's always been that way, Shirley thought that the difference between people truly was as great as heaven and earth. After running for a while, suddenly wails and hollers could be heard from all around. Caught him, he's here. Everyone, come here. That damn cultivator is here. Ghost head after ghost head all popped out. Shirley spoke up. Ah, I can't believe we still picked the wrong path. The effect of the stumbling charms had finished. They were still surrounded, after all. There were at least hundreds in this mob of monsters and ghosts, surrounding them in wave after wave, and the numbers were still increasing. Shirley really didn't know why there were so many inhuman creatures gathered here, but there wasn't any time to wonder. Shirley said warmly, "It wasn't my intent to disturb anyone. I pray you will all show us mercy." A headless ghost spoke up. "Stinking cultivator, why didn't you show mercy first? The ones who broke and dispersed a bunch of ghost fires over there was your doing, wasn't it?" Shirley replied innocently, "It wasn't us. Truth be told, I'm but a lowly scrap collector." Don't try to argue. What kind of scrap collector looks like you? You're clearly a cultivator. Besides you, who here could be a cultivator that could do such a cruel thing? It doesn't have to be a cultivator to break and disperse ghost fires, Shirley reasoned. Then who can it be? Ghosts? Shirley quietly placed his hands into his sleeves. That's not impossible. Damn cultivator, you. The band of ghosts, who were laughing and howling to the skies, suddenly stopped in their tracks. Shirley wondered, what about me? He might have asked the question, but they had just stopped in their tracks now. They all stared at Shirley as if they were seeing something exceedingly terrifying. Their mouths were either wide open or shut tight, and a number of the heads held in the felon's hands were even dropped to the ground. Shirley ventured, "Everyone? Are you all?" Yet unexpectedly, before he finished his question, the band of ghosts all fled the scene, like the wind blowing away remnants of clouds. Shirley was taken aback. What on earth? He hadn't even taken out that bundle of talismans that he clutched in his hand in his sleeves, and yet he was found out? Were they really that sharp? And those weren't even particularly powerful talismans. Shirley felt incredulous. Was it really them that they saw? Or was it something behind him? Having thought this, he turned his head back and looked behind him. Behind him, There was only the passed-out ox-cart owner and that carefree, red-clad youth who was still propping up his cheek. Seeing him look over, San Lang smiled and dropped his hand. "Mr. Cultivator, you are amazing. These ghosts were all scared away by you." Shirlian smiled back. "Really? I didn't realize that I was actually this amazing." He then pulled at the reins a couple of times, and the wheels of the ox cart began to roll slowly forward once more. The road after that was smooth, and it didn't take an hour before the ox cart slowly pulled out of the forest and came to an open mountain path. Down below the hills, the warm glow of the lights illuminated Poochie village. That was really the path of best luck, with a close call but no actual danger. A night breeze brushed by, and Shirlian turned his head back once more. San Lang seemed to be in a very good mood, and had laid down, watching the moon with his hands pillowed behind his head. Beneath the faint moonlight, that youth's complexion looked surreal. After humming for a moment, Shirlian smiled. "My friend." "What is it?" San Lang replied. "Have you ever had your fortune told?" Shirlian asked. "No," San Lang replied, turning to face Shirlian. "Do you want me to tell your fortune?" San Lang looked at him and smiled. "Do you want to?" "A little bit," Shirlian said. San Lang gave a slight nod. "Sure." He sat up, his body leaned slightly towards Shirlian. "How do you want to read my fortune?" "How about palm reading?" Shirlian suggested. Hearing this, the corners of San Lang's lips curled. It was hard to tell what that smile meant, but he only replied with, "Sure." Then he extended his left hand to Shirlian. This left hand was long and shapely, clean and elegant, a beautiful hand. It wasn't a vulnerable kind of beautiful, but rather there was strength hidden beneath the muscles. It was a hand that one wouldn't want to have choking their throat. Shirlian was mindful of not touching San Lang due to the slight change in the latter's expression the last time that they touched, so he simply looked down to study the hand up close. The moon above was bright, but not too bright, yet even in the midst of the night it wasn't too dark either. Shirlian thoroughly scrutinized the hand before him as the ox cart languidly climbed the hills. The wheels and the wooden shafts creaked as they rolled. "So?" San Lang asked. Shirlian took his time, then slowly said, "You've got a good hand." "Oh yeah? How so?" San Lang asked. Shirlian raised his head and said warmly, "You have a strong character, quite stubborn, but whenever you run into obstacles, you remain true to yourself and are able to transform the bad into good. You have a limitless well of good fortune. Your future is bright and full of success." All of that was complete bullshit, made up on the spot. Shirlian had never learned palmistry. Once upon a time, when he was still banished, he often regretted not learning palmistry or face reading at the Royal Holy Pavilion. If he had the skills, then earning pennies on the streets wouldn't have been so hard, and he wouldn't have to busk or shatter boulders on his chest. What he really wanted to see wasn't the fortune of this youth, but rather whether his hands had fingerprints and palm prints. Normal ghosts and monsters could fabricate fake bodies and pretend to be human, but their craft was rough and often overlooked minute details, such as fingerprints and palm prints. However, the body of this youth appeared altogether normal, unperturbed and with clear palm prints. If he was a ghost in disguise, then he had to be of a caliber greater than a savage to create such a flawless disguise. But why would a ghost king of such special status spend his time traveling with Shirlian on an ox cart to visit Poochie village? Just as how heavenly officials were busily working like machines, ghost kings should also have their hands full. Shirlian pretended to be confident in his fortune-telling and sweated through his bold-faced lies until he couldn't come up with anything else. San Lang watched him unblinkingly the entire time, sitting through this nonsense with an intrigued smile, and then he chuckled under his breath. "Got any more?" San Lang asked. "No way. Did he want Shirlian to make up some more?" "Is there something else you want me to look at?" Shirlian asked. Don't fortune tellers always tell you about love and marriage? Sanlang asked. Shirley cleared his throat and replied solemnly, To be honest, I'm actually not that great at fortune telling, so I don't know how to predict relationships. But I don't imagine you to have anything to worry about. Sanlang arched his brows. Why do you say that? Shirley grinned. There must be many girls who have a crush on you. And why do you suppose so many girls must like me? Sanlang asked. Shirley was about to answer before he realized that this kid was manipulating him into praising him. Helpless and amused, Shirley didn't know what to say and rubbed his forehead. Sanlang. This was the first time Shirley had ever called Sanlang by his name, and the youth laughed delightfully, letting Shirley off the hook. The ox cart had finally laboriously entered the village, and Shirley turned around and hurriedly got off the cart with his hand lightly supporting his forehead. Sanlang followed behind him and jumped off. Shirley finally looked up and realized with a start that Sanlang was actually a head taller than him. It wasn't obvious when the youth was lazily lying in the hay, but standing tall, the two couldn't see eye to eye on even ground. Sanlang stood before the cart and stretched, and Shirley asked, Sanlang, where will you go now? I don't know. Maybe I'll sleep on the streets, or a cave will do, Sanlang sighed. That won't do, Shirley said, concerned. Sanlang shrugged. It can't be helped. I have no place to go. Then he grinned. Thank you for telling my fortune. I'll count on your good words. I will see you later. Shirley felt bad about his fortune telling, and seeing that the youth actually turned to leave, he quickly called after him. Wait, why don't you come to my shrine, if you don't mind it? Sanlang stopped in his tracks and turned halfway around. Is that okay? Shirley explained. The place wasn't originally mine anyway, and I heard it housed a number of passers-by. It's just probably much shabbier than what you're used to. I'm afraid you wouldn't be comfortable. If this boy really was a runaway young master, Shirley couldn't possibly let him run around the streets aimlessly. He strongly suspected that Sanlang may have only eaten that half a bun all day today, and youth or not, he would collapse somewhere if he kept it up. Hearing Shirley, Sanlang turned his body around and said nothing, but walked up close to Shirley and leaned forward. Shirley didn't understand what he was up to, only that the distance between the two shortened too fast. He suddenly didn't rather whether his hands had fingerprints and palm prints. Normal ghosts, I'm actually not that great at fortune telling, so I don't know how to predict relationships. But I don't imagine you to have anything to worry about. Sanlang arched his brows. Why do you say that? Shirley grinned. There must be many girls who have a crush on you. And why do you suppose so many girls must like me? Sanlang asked. Shirley was about to answer before he realized that this kid was manipulating him into praising him. Helpless and amused, Shirley didn't know what to say and rubbed his forehead. Sanlang. This was the first time Shirley had ever called Sanlang by his name, and the youth laughed delightfully, letting Shirley off the hook. The ox cart had finally laboriously entered the village, and Shirley turned around and hurriedly got off the cart with his hand lightly supporting his forehead. Sanlang followed behind him and jumped off. Shirley finally looked up and realized with a start that Sanlang was actually a head taller than him. It wasn't obvious when the youth was lazily lying in the hay, but standing tall, the two couldn't see eye to eye on even ground. Sanlang stood before the cart and stretched, and Shirley asked, Sanlang, where will you go now? I don't know. Maybe I'll sleep on the streets, or a cave will do, Sanlang sighed. That won't do, Shirley said, concerned. Sanlang shrugged. It can't be helped. I have no place to go. Then he grinned. Thank you for telling my fortune. I'll count on your good words. I will see you later. Shirley felt bad about his fortune telling, and seeing that the youth actually turned to leave, he quickly called after him. Wait, why don't you come to my shrine, if you don't mind it? Sanlang stopped in his tracks and turned halfway around. Is that okay? Shirley explained. The place wasn't originally mine anyway, and I heard it housed a number of passers-by. It's just probably much shabbier than what you're used to. I'm afraid you wouldn't be comfortable. If this boy really was a runaway young master, Shirley couldn't possibly let him run around the streets aimlessly. He strongly suspected that San Lang may have only eaten that half a bun all day today, and youth or not, he would collapse somewhere if he kept it up. Hearing Shirley, San Lang turned his body around and said nothing, but walked up close to Shirley and leaned forward. Shirley didn't understand what he was up to, only that the distance between the two shortened too fast. He suddenly didn't know what to do. That youth then straightened back up and lifted the giant bag of junk in his hand. He said, "Then let's go." Shirley was stunned right there and then. He watched as the lanky youth walked away with his giant bag of junk as if it was the most natural thing to do in the world, and it made him mutter, "Forgive my sins." San Lang strode a few steps over and walked out. Shirley was about to follow him, but remembered at the last second that the old driver was still asleep in the ox cart. He went back around and woke the old man, advising him to keep the incident tonight a secret. After witnessing his powers, the old man didn't dare to say no and hurriedly dragged his old Huang home. There was only a roll of straw mat left on the cart. Shirley carried it on his back, turned around, and saw that San Lang had already started climbing the hill towards Puchi Shrine with his bag of random junk. Nearing the crooked, shaky shack that was Puchi Shrine, San Lang lowered his head and puffed out a laugh, as if seeing something amusing. Shirley approached and saw that he was looking at his sign requesting for donations, and cleared his throat. "As you see, that's it really. That's why I said you might not be comfortable here." "It's not too bad," San Lang said. In the past, it had always been Shirley who told others, "It's all right, it's not too bad." Hearing it from someone else for the first time made him feel rather complicated. The Puchi Shrine door had already long gone rotten, so Shirley had torn it down and replaced it with some curtains. He lifted the drapes and said, "Come on in." And San Lang entered the shrine with him. There wasn't much in the small shrine, only a long altar table, 2 small stools, a small cushion, and a donation box. Shirley reached for the bag in San Lang's hands, took out the fortune shaker, incense burner, some paper, and miscellaneous stationery, and placed them on the altar table. He then lit up a used red candle that someone had stuffed into his hand while he was collecting junk, and the shrine brightened instantly. San Lang picked up the fortune shaker, playfully gave it a shake, and then put it down. "So, is there a bed?" Shirley silently took down the straw mat from his back and unrolled it to show him. San Lang raised his brows and asked, "There's only one?" Of course, Shirley didn't think that he needed more than one, since he had only met the boy on his way back. So he said, "If you don't mind, we can squeeze a bit for the night." "That works too," San Lang said. Shirley then reached for the broom and swept the floor, while San Lang looked around some more. "Gurgur, aren't you missing something in this shrine?" Shirley had just finished sweeping, and he was kneeling down on the mat when he heard this. He answered as he patted their bedding, "Other than followers, I don't think that there's anything missing." San Lang crouched down too, a hand propping up his chin. "What about the divine statue of the god?" His words reminded Shirley. How could he forget the most important thing for a shrine? A god's statue. A shrine without its idol is no shrine. Although one could say that the god himself was present, He couldn't possibly just sit up on the altar all day, every day. Shirley contemplated for a moment, and then came up with a solution. I bought some paper and ink today. I'll paint a portrait tomorrow. Painting a portrait of himself to hang in the shrine he built for himself, to pray to himself. If the heavenly court caught wind of this, they'd probably laugh at him for another 10 years. But the cost of commissioning a sculpture was rather hefty, and that took time. So Shirley would rather be laughed at for 10 years and save money instead. Unexpectedly, Sanlang spoke up. A portrait? I know how to paint one. Do you need my help? Startled, Shirley smiled. Thank you, but I'm afraid that you don't know how to paint the Prince of Shanle. Am I right? After all, most of his portraits were burnt and destroyed 800 years ago. No matter how many were left now, not many people would have seen them before. Sanlang replied, Of course I do. Weren't we just talking about him earlier on the cart? Shirley remembered the conversation. That was indeed the case. Earlier he had said, You probably haven't heard of him before, but Sanlang did not respond. Hearing him speak now, Shirley was surprised. He finished with the bedding and sat up straight. Sanlang, don't tell me that you really know him. Sanlang sat down on the mat and replied, I do. Shirley thought that when Sanlang spoke, his expression and tone of voice were quite fascinating. He was always smiling and laughing, but one could never tell whether his smiles were genuine or whether they were actually mocking the other party for being an idiot. Having listened to him on the way back, Shirley was rather interested in Sanlang's appraisal of him. Shirley moved to sit next to him and asked, So what do you think about this Prince of Shanle? Both men looked at each other under the lamp. The flame of the red candle flickered slightly. Sanlang had his back to the candlelight, and it was hard to see his exact expression with his eyes immersed under the shadow. After a moment, he replied, I think the Heavenly Emperor must not like him. Shirley wasn't expecting this answer and paused. Why do you think that? Why else would he have banished the prince twice? Sanlang replied. Shirley smiled a little and thought, indeed, the thinking of a child. He lowered his head and slowly removed his belt. I don't think this has anything to do with like or dislike. There are many things in this world that can't be explained through like and dislike. Shirley turned around, removed his white boots, and continued. Besides, one needs to be punished for making mistakes. The Heavenly Emperor was simply doing his duty. Perhaps, Sanlang responded non-committally. Shirley took off his outer robes, folded them, and was ready to place them on the altar table. Wanting to say more, he turned around, only to see Sanlang's eyes staring at his ankles. It was hard to describe that gaze. It was icy but searing, scorching but with a hint of chill. Shirley looked down and immediately understood. On his right ankle was a black, cursed shackle. The first curse was around his neck, and the second around his ankle. Both curses were placed in areas not easily concealed. In the past, if anyone asked, Shirley would lie and say it was for training purposes. But that answer probably wouldn't deceive Sanlang. Thankfully, Sanlang didn't say anything and looked away after a while. Shirley laid down on the mat, and the youth obediently laid down too, without removing a single article of clothing. Shirley figured he was probably not used to sleeping on the floor like this, and thought perhaps he'd find a way to get to bed after all. Let's rest. Shirley softly blew out the candle, and all became dark once more. The next morning, when Shirley opened his eyes, Sanlang was not next to him. He raised his head and stopped, stunned. On top of the altar, there hung a portrait. It was a portrait of a man with a golden mask, dressed glamorously in extravagant attire. There was a sword in one hand, a flower in the other. It was a beautifully and vividly painted portrait of the God-pleasing Prince of Shanle. It had been years since Shirley saw a painting of himself like that, and he stared at it blankly for a long time before getting up. He got dressed then pulled back the curtain. Sunlung was just outside, hiding in the shadows alongside the shrine, twirling the broom in his hand and watching the sky with a bored expression. It seemed this youth really didn't like the sun. The way he was watching the sky was as if he wanted to pluck the sun and smash it into pieces. All the fallen leaves around the shrine had been swept into a mound next to the entrance. Shirlian went out of the door and asked, "Did you sleep well last night?" Sunlung was still leaning on the wall, but turned his head over and said, "Not too badly." Shirlian walked over, took the broom from his hands, and asked, "Sunlung, did you paint that portrait in the shrine?" Sunlung replied, "Uh-huh." "It's really well done," Shirlian praised. Sunlung's lips lifted, but he didn't say anything. Maybe because he slept all over the place last night. His ponytail this morning seemed to be even more crooked, loose, and casual. It actually looked quite nice, casual but not messy, rather playful. Shirlian pointed at his own hair and asked, "Want me to help you with that?" Sunlung nodded and went back inside with Shirlian. When Sunlung sat down, Shirlian let down his black hair and quietly started examining it. Even if the palm prints and fingerprints were perfectly detailed, ghosts always had one flaw in their body creation. The hair of a living person was uncountable, and it came in individual strands that were intricate and distinct. The fake bodies created by ghosts had hair that was either a black blur or a pasted mass like long strips of fabric. Sometimes they just went bald. Shirlian had checked his palm prints and fingerprints the night before, and he had initially lowered his guard, but seeing the portrait this morning raised his suspicions again. How could an average man know how to paint this portrait? Yet, when he combed his fingers gently through Sunlung's hair, Shirlian couldn't find anything amiss. After a while, Sunlung let out a laugh as if he was ticklish from the touch. He turned his head slightly and looked at Shirlian out of the corner of his eye. He said, "Gurgur, are you going to tie my hair, or are you thinking of doing something else?" With his hair down, Sunlung still looked handsome, but there was an added air of wickedness. His teasing brought Shirlian out of his momentary musing. Shirlian smiled and said, all right, and quickly finished tying his hair. But after that was done, when Sunlung looked at his own reflection in the bucket of water in the corner, he turned back to Shirlian with quirked brows. Shirlian took a look and coughed. The ponytail was lopsided before. After Shirlian retied it, it was still crooked. Although Sunlung didn't say anything and merely stared at him, Shirlian felt that he hadn't felt this embarrassed in centuries. He put down his hands and was just about to suggest that they try again when suddenly there was a commotion outside. Sounds of footfalls approached, and several loud bellows rang out. "Great Immortal!" Bewildered, Shirlian ran to the door just in time to see his shrine surrounded by a large crowd. Everyone's faces red and excited. The village chief sped ahead towards Shirlian and grabbed his hand. A god has descended upon our small village. We are so grateful." Shirlian was confused. The rest of the villagers also followed the chief and surrounded Shirlian. Welcome to Poochie Village, great immortal. My lord,
Okay! Okay! Actually, it will be a bit funny if it will turn out that I had my microphone on the wrong source this whole time. So it was just silent. I think this would be very funny. And I will not check. Because I don't want to have that cringe moment. Cringe moment. So, well, happens to the best. Anyway.
can you bless me with a wife? One asked. My lord, can you bless my wife with a child? Said another. My lord, we have fresh water chestnuts for you. Do you want water chestnuts? After eating, can you conveniently bless me with a good harvest this year? The villagers were so enthusiastic and passionate that Shirlian had to take a few steps back. It seemed that the old driver from the night before had a big mouth. Shirlian had told him not to tell, but the instant morning arrived, news had already spread all around the entire village. The villagers had not a clue of the kind of god worshipped in Poochie Shrine, but still, they all crowded in wishing to light incense in prayer. It didn't matter who it was. A god was a god, and prayers do no harm. Shirlian had initially expected tumbleweeds and crows at the shrine, with only a few coming to offer prayers, so he didn't think to prepare a lot of incense. Who knew that with such hubbub, all the incense was gone in a second. The little incense burner was filled to the brim. Its heavy smoke enveloped the shrine. Shirlian had not smelt the scent in a long time, and choked on it. As he choked, he said, "Everyone, this shrine does not bless you with wealth. Really, please stop wishing for wealth. The result will be unpredictable. I'm sorry, the shrine doesn't bless you with a good marriage either. And no, It doesn't grant pregnancies, either. Sun Lung stopped caring about his sloppy hair and sat down next to the donation box, one hand propping up his chin, the other grabbing water chestnuts to eat. Many village girls saw him and blushed. They said to Shirlian, do you grant? Shirlian didn't know what they were going to ask, but felt instinctively that it must be stopped immediately, and cried, no. At last, when the crowd dispersed, the altar was filled with fruits and vegetables, even rice and noodles.
Whoa.
No matter how this had happened, it was still a good abundance of offerings. Shirlian swept the floor and took out the trash, and Sun Lung followed him out. The shrine is doing pretty well. Shirlian shook his head and kept sweeping around. This was an unexpected turnout. Normally, there shouldn't be more than 1 or 2 passers-by every month. How can that be? Sun Lung asked. Shirlian glanced at him and smiled. This was probably thanks to your good luck. Saying so, he recalled that he wanted to change the door curtains, so he took out a new curtain to drape the front entrance. He stepped back to look at his work and noticed Sun Lung stood still before it. What's wrong? Shirlian asked. Sun Lung stared at the curtains thoughtfully. Following his gaze, Shirlian realized that he was looking more at the seal drawn onto the fabric. It was a seal that Shirlian had drafted in passing before, complex and rigid. Originally, it was for warding off evil and to shield from intrusions, but since it was Shirlian himself who drew it, who knew if it might attract bad luck instead? Since there was no door, though, it was still safer to have a protection ward just in case. Seeing this boy fixed in place before the curtain with the seal, Shirlian's mind stirred. He called out, Sun Lung? Could it be that the seal had blocked Sun Lung out of the door, preventing him from entering the shrine?
Girl.
Sure, he wouldn't be gone for too long. Sun Lung glanced at him and flashed a smile. I'm going to head out for a bit, he said. He turned and left after casually tossing out those words. Shirlian should have chased after him to ask him about it, but he had a strange feeling that since Sun Lung had said he would leave for a bit, then for sure he wouldn't be gone for too long. He would still definitely return. Thus, Shirlian went back inside the shrine. Shirlian started rummaging through his large bag of junk and dug out a wok and a large butcher knife. He eyed the vegetables on the altar and stood up. After one incense time, there was the sound of footfalls approaching the shrine as expected. One could imagine from those unhurried footsteps that it was a particular young man, strolling leisurely. The 2 objects in Shirlian's hands had now transformed into 2 plates of food. He looked over them and heaved a long sigh, unable to bear the sight of their tragedy. He set the plates down and went out for a look. Sure enough, he saw Sun Lung again. Outside the shrine, perhaps it was because of the blazing sun, but Sun Lung had his red tunic peeled and tied around his waist. It revealed his white undershirt, with its sleeves pulled back, looking rather clean and tidy. His right foot stepped on top of a large wooden board, and he had a hatchet in his left hand. The hatchet was probably borrowed from one of the neighbors. It looked blunt and heavy, but he wielded it so easily. It was as if it was a very sharp blade. Sun Lung nonchalantly hacked at the board, shaving off wood like dough. He peered from the corner of his eyes and saw Shirlian come out. I'm just making something, Sun Lung said. Shirlian watched Sun Lung work and realized that he was making a door. It was just the perfect size, detailed and exquisite. Julian thought that since he must have come from a wealthy family, Sun Lung wouldn't be the physical labor type, but that was obviously not the case. There was definitely more to him than met the eye. "Thank you for your hard work, Sun Lung," Julian said. Sun Lung simply smiled, threw down the hatchet, and installed the door. He knocked on it twice and said, "If you're going to draw a seal, at least draw it on a proper door. It works better." Then he swept aside the curtain and entered the shrine. It seemed that the seal on the curtain really had no effect on him, and he didn't even care for it. Julian closed the new door behind him, but he couldn't help but open it again, and then close it again. He opened and closed it again,
Silly.
then again. Amazed by how well it was made, Julian opened and closed the door several times before suddenly realizing how foolish he was being. Sun Lung had already sat down inside, and Julian left the door to bring out steamed buns that the villagers had offered earlier in the morning onto the altar table. Sun Lung took a look at the buns and didn't say anything. He merely chuckled softly as if he knew something, but Julian ignored him and reached over to pour 2 bowls of water. Just as he was about to sit down, he saw Sun Lung rolling up his sleeves. There was a small line of tattoo with markings of strange characters on his arm. Sun Lung noticed his gaze and pulled down his sleeves, then smiled. "It was done when I was young." It was obvious that Sun Lung didn't want to speak more on the subject, so Julian didn't pursue it. He sat down and looked up at the portrait again. He said, "Sun Lung, you paint so well. Did someone at home teach you?" "No, I just do it for fun." Sun Lung poked at the buns with his chopsticks. "How did you even know how to paint the Prince of Xianle?" Julian asked. "Didn't you say I know everything? Of course I know how to paint him as well," Sun Lung laughed. This was a shameless way of answering, but Sun Lung evidently didn't care if his answers would make Julian suspicious, nor was he afraid of being questioned. So Julian smiled and dropped the subject. Just then, there was a large commotion outside the shrine. Both of them raised their heads at the same time and exchanged looks. Someone started knocking on the door urgently, shouting, "Great Immortal, something has happened. Great Immortal, help." Julian opened the door and saw a number of villagers surrounding the door. The chief saw the door open and called out in relief, "Great Immortal, this person looks like he is dying. Please save him." Hearing this, Julian rushed to the group of villagers standing in a circle around what appeared to be a cultivator. He was unkempt and disheveled, with sand all over him, and his robes and shoes were tattered. It seemed he had been running for his life for a long time before collapsing in the village, where the villagers brought him to the Puchi shrine in a hurry. Julian told the crowd, "Don't worry, he's not dead." He knelt down and felt the man's pulse and various pressure points. On his body, Julian found a number of magical accessories, like the 8 trigrams map, a steel sword, and so on. This man didn't appear to be an ordinary cultivator, and Julian's heart sank. Not long later, the cultivator slowly opened his eyes and asked in a croaking voice, "Where am I?" The chief exclaimed, "This is the village of Puchi." The man mumbled to himself, I'm out. I finally escaped." He looked around and widened his eyes, screaming in fear, "Save me! Please help!" Julian had expected this reaction and gently asked, "My friend, what's going on? What are you running from? Don't be afraid. Take your time to say it clearly." Yeah, don't be scared. We've got good on our side. He'll definitely solve all your problems, one of the villagers said. None of these villagers actually saw him perform any miracles, but they had certainly become quite devout. And there wasn't much that Shirley could say. Solve all his problems? There's no guarantee of that at all. Shirley asked the cultivator, "Where did you come from?" I've come from the Banyue Pass, that cultivator replied. The villagers looked at each other. Where is that? I've never heard of it before. Shirley explained. The Banyue Pass is in the northwest, a fair distance away. How did you make it over here? I finally escaped and came here, the cultivator said. His words were incoherent and his mood was unstable. In such a situation, the more people around, the harder it was to speak, with everyone talking at the same time. So Shirley said, "Let's talk inside." Shirley easily lifted the cultivator up from the
I'm
ground.
gonna lie, I
and
do not
helped
remember
into
this part.
The shrine. He turned to say to the villagers, "Everyone, please return. Don't watch anymore." "Great Immortal, what's happened to him?" asked a villager. "Yeah, what's going on? If there's anything we can do to help." The villagers were very enthusiastic, but that was precisely what was making this more difficult. Without any choice, Shirley told them seriously, "He may be bewitched." Upon hearing this, the villagers were greatly alarmed. Bewitchment was no joke. Better to not stick around. The crowd broke up and everyone hurried away. Shirley didn't know whether to laugh or cry and shook his head. He closed the door. Sunlang was still at the table playing with his chopsticks, and he eyed the cultivator closely. "Don't worry about him. Keep eating," Shirley told him. He then set the man down on the other stool while he stood. "My friend, I am the shrine master here, and also something of a cultivator. Don't be nervous. You can tell us if there's anything. I can perhaps give you a hand if there's anything that I can help with. You mentioned the Banyue Pass." The cultivator took a few gasps of air. After coming to a place with fewer people and listening to Shirley's comforting words, the man finally calmed down. "Have you ever heard of the Banyue Pass?" the man asked. "I have," Shirley said. "It's a city built within an oasis in the Gobi Desert. It received its name from the beauty of its night scenery. When the half moon hangs in the night sky, I hear it's a sight to behold." Oasis? Beauty? The cultivator shook his head. "That's all from over 200 years ago. Half moon? More like half dead." "What do you mean?" Shirley asked. The man's face turned white as a sheet. "Because at least half of those who pass through its gates will disappear." Shirley had never heard of this before. "Who did you hear this from?" he asked. "I didn't hear it from anyone. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. The man sat up straight. "There was a merchant group needing to cross the desert. They knew that the place was not safe, so they hired my entire sect to guard them on their journey. But," he cried angrily, "but in the end, I'm the only one left." Shirley waved his hand, gesturing to him to relax. "How many were you?" "With my sect, plus the merchant group, we were about 60 people." 60. In the 100 years that Xuanji had wreaked havoc, only 200 or so people lost their lives, according to Ling Wen's records. But from what this cultivator said, this matter had been going on for over 100 years. If so many people went missing every time over the course of a couple of 100 years, then the numbers would be significant once they were added up. "When did the half moon pass become the half dead pass?" Shirley asked.
How dead pass?
The cultivator replied,
Oh my god.
"Maybe about 150 years ago." It was right after it became the den of a ghost. Shirley wanted to ask about the demon in more detail, but couldn't stop the feeling that there was something not right, and it wasn't sitting well with him. At this point, there was no way to hide that strange feeling in his heart. He furrowed his brows and became silent. Suddenly, Sunlung spoke up. "You escaped from the Banyue Pass and never stopped running until now?" "Yeah, I barely survived," that cultivator sighed. "Really?" Sunlung stopped talking, but Shirlian had already understood what was amiss. He turned around and said warmly, "You must be thirsty, having escaped all this way." The man paused, but Shirlian had already placed a bowl of water in front of him. "Here, have some water." Looking at the water, hesitation flashed across the man's face. Shirlian stood next to him, hands crossed in his sleeves, waiting patiently. This man traveled far from the northwest and was running for his life, no less. He should be starving and parched. From the looks of him, it didn't seem like he ate or drank anything the entire way. Yet when he woke, all he did was talk, and never once asked for a single drop of water or for a bite to eat. He had no visible craving when faced with the food and water on the altar after entering the shrine. Heck, he didn't even spare a look at any of them. Truly, very unlike the living. Under Shirlian and Sunlung's gaze, the cultivator held up the water bowl to his lips and bent over slowly to gulp the water down. He did not look as if he was satisfying his thirst. Instead, he looked cautious and guarded. As he drank, Shirlian could hear sloshing sounds, as if water was being poured into an empty bottle. At that moment, Shirlian knew what the cultivator was. He seized the man's arm. "You don't have to drink anymore." The cultivator's hand trembled as he looked at Shirlian in bewilderment. "Drinking wouldn't help anyway, right?" Shirlian smiled. The man's expression instantly changed upon hearing this. He unsheathed his steel sword with his other hand and swung it towards Shirlian. Without changing his stance, Shirlian raised his hand and easily flicked the sword aside. Seeing that Shirlian was still tightly gripping onto his hand, the cultivator gritted his teeth and extracted it from his hold suddenly. Shirlian felt the arm in his grip suddenly go limp like a balloon deflating as it slipped away from his palm. The moment the cultivator broke free, he ran toward the door, but Shirlian wasn't concerned. In this undisturbed space, without people around, Roya could drag him back instantly, even if he fled a good distance away. But just as he raised his other hand, a sharp blast of air whipped past him. It was as if someone had shot an arrow from behind him. It pierced the man through the stomach and nailed him to the door. Shirlian looked over, and it turned out to be a chopstick. He turned back for a look. Sunlung stood up from the altar and walked past him to pull out the chopstick. Sunlung waved the chopstick at Shirlian and said, "This got dirty. I'm going to throw it out." Even with such a serious wound, the cultivator did not groan in pain. He simply silently slithered down from the door. Fluids flowed from his abdomen. It wasn't blood, but the water that he had just drunk. Shirlian and Sunlung knelt down next to the body, and Shirlian felt around the wound. He felt as though this wound was like a blown-up balloon that had been pricked. Cold air was leaking out of it, and the cultivator's corpse gradually changed. Earlier, he was clearly a buff man, but now he'd shrunk a size down. His face and limbs shriveled, even as he continued to shrink. He looked more like an old man now. "It's an empty shell," Shirley said. Some ghosts, if they could not transform into a perfect human form, would create these empty shells. They would use realistic components to meticulously create a fake skin bag. These skin bags often use real living humans as references. Sometimes they would even use human skin directly. Naturally, their palm prints, fingerprints, and hair would all be flawless. And if the ghosts themselves did not wear these skins, there wouldn't be any evil aura stuck to them, so they would not need to heed those evil repelling spells and talismans. This was why the seal on the door did not block the cultivator out. However, these kinds of empty shells could easily be seen through. After all, they were hollow on the inside. If there was no one wearing the skin, then they could only follow instructions of the manipulator like puppets. The instructions could not be overly complicated either. They had to be simple, repetitive, and set up beforehand. Therefore, the expressions and behavior of those skin bags were lifeless and sluggish, unlike real humans. For example, they could only repeat certain phrases, do certain repetitive things, or answer their own questions. If one asked too many questions, they wouldn't be able to answer and would end up exposing themselves. Of course, Shirley had more practical ways of exposing those skin bags. Just let them drink some water or eat something. After all, skin bags were hollow, without any organs. If they ate or drank, it would be like throwing something or pouring water into an empty can. The echo could clearly be heard, and it was a sound very different than that of a human consuming food and water. The corpse had completely deflated into a pile of withered skin. Sun Lung poked at it with his chopstick and threw it away. "This shell is rather interesting." Shirley knew what he was talking about. The cultivator's expressions and movements were more than realistic. He had conversed with them animatedly, gestured wildly, responded emotionally, very much like a real person. Whoever was behind its control had to be quite powerful. Shirley glanced at Sun Lung. "Looks like you're quite knowledgeable about these wicked arts too, Sun Lung." Sun Lung smiled. "Not too much," he responded. The empty shell came to Shirley specifically to tell him about the Banyue Pass. Whether it was fake or real, its intention was obviously to lure him there. To play it safe, he would have to inquire about it in the communication array. Shirley pinched his fingers and calculated the power he had left. There should still be enough to use it a few more times, so he formed a seal with his hands to enter the communication array. The communication array was livelier than usual, and it was not because of deities bustling around with official duties. Rather, it seemed everyone was playing some sort of game, laughing and shouting. Shirley was taken aback. Just then, Ling Wen reached out to him. "Your Highness is back? How are your days down in the mortal realm?" "It's all right. Not too bad. What's everyone doing? They seem so happy," Shirley asked.
Nie podoba mi się.
Ling Wen replied, "The Wind Master has just returned and is giving away merits. Why don't you go and see if you can grab any?" Sure enough, Shirley could hear the officials cheerfully shouting. "I grabbed 100 merits. How come I only managed to get one? 1,000 merits. Thanks, Wind Master." It was like catching money raining down from the skies, Shirley thought. His donation box was empty. But firstly, he didn't know how to make a grab for those merits. And secondly, the officials must be very familiar with each other to play those sort of casual games. Shirley wasn't on good terms with many of them, and didn't think it was appropriate for him to join. So he paid it no mind and called out to the crowd. "Does anyone here know of the Banyue Pass? The laughing and shouting came to a sudden stop, and silence ensued. Once again, Shirley felt depressed. It was fine if no one responded to his little snippets, if they were odd or awkward. The other officials didn't share those either, and he indeed seemed to be out of tune with them whenever he did so. But this was official business. The communication array was a place where heavenly officials often made requests for information on ghosts or mystic issues. If something came up or someone asked for assistance, everyone pitched in, giving suggestions or lending a hand. Those without anything to add would say, "I'll ask around when I'm free." Banyue was work, so there was no reason why no one responded. Just then, someone shouted. The Wind Master just threw out 10,000 merits. The communication array came alive again, and the officials went away to grab for more merits, thoroughly ignoring Shirley. This made him realize that there was probably more to this than it appeared, and the court would never respond. The Wind Master was certainly quite affluent, Shirley thought, throwing away tens of thousands of merits just like that. He was about to exit the communication array when Ling Wen called out to him privately. "Your Highness, why did you mention the Banyue Pass?" Ling Wen asked. Shirley recounted his encounter with the skin bag. That empty shell pretended to be a survivor from the Banyue Pass. It has to have a motive. I wasn't sure whether his words were true, so I came in to ask, "What's going on with that place?" Ling Wen was quiet for a moment before she said gravely, "Your Highness, I advise you to stay away from this matter." Shirley thought that she might say something similar. Otherwise, a matter like this wouldn't have lasted for over 150 years, and the court would not just go silent because he asked about it. Is it true that half the people go missing every time they traverse through Banyue? Ling Wen was silent again. It's not easy for us to speak about this matter. Shirley heard the deliberation in her words. There might be something putting her on the spot, so he said, "All right, I understand. If it's inconvenient, then we shall not speak of it again, and we have never spoken in private on this subject either." Shirley withdrew his divine consciousness and left the communication array. He rose to his feet and used the broom to sweep the fake skin to the side. After mulling over Ling Wen's words for a moment, he raised his head and looked at San Lang. "San Lang, I'm afraid that I will be going on a long journey." Ling Wen's attitude was enough to show that this matter implicated too much. Since this empty shell came to him on its own, then it must have wanted to lure him there. It was definitely not a good place to go to. Yet San Lang said, "Sure thing. Burger, can you bring me too, if you don't mind?" Shirley wondered curiously. "It's going to be a long and difficult journey, so why do you want to come?" San Lang smiled. "Do you want to know about the Banyue Pass?" Shirley paused and then said, "You know about that too?" San Lang crossed his arms and replied languidly. The Banyue Pass was originally not known as Banyue Pass. The Banyue Pass was where the kingdom of Banyue used to be located 200 years ago. He sat up straight, his eyes going bright. The wicked cultivator of Banyue was... Shirley placed the broom against the wall and was about to sit down to listen when there was a knock on the door. It was already evening, and the villagers were hiding in their homes after hearing that there was bewitchment about. So who could be knocking? Shirley stood by the door and held his breath briefly, but he didn't see the seal reacting. Another knock. It sounded like there were two people outside. Shirley contemplated for a moment and then opened the door. Sure enough, two young men dressed in black stood at his door, one handsome and one elegant. It was Nan Feng and Fu Yao. Shirley said, "You two." Fu Yao rolled his eyes, and Nan Feng blurted out, You're going to the Banyue Pass, aren't you? Where did you guys hear that? Shirlian wondered. Nanfeng said, some officials were talking about it. I heard that you asked about the Banyue Pass in the communication array today. Shirlian understood their intentions and crossed his hands in his sleeves. I see, you both volunteer, right? Both junior officials' expressions contorted, as though they had a toothache. Yes, they replied. Shirlian couldn't help but smile and said, I get it. But I want you two to understand that should there be any issues or crises en route, you're welcome to run away at any time. Shirlian stepped aside and invited them in to discuss the journey in detail. But then, when the two saw the carefree teen sitting inside, their initially grim faces instantly turned ashen. Nanfeng charged in. He pushed Shirlian behind him and shouted, Stand back. What's wrong? Shirlian asked, startled. Sanlang stayed in his seat, spread open his hands, and also asked, What's wrong? Fu Yao furrowed his brows and demanded, Who are you? He is a friend of mine, Shirlian said. Do you know each other? Sanlang, looking completely innocent, asked, Gurga, who are these two? Hearing Sanlang call Shirlian Gurga made Nanfeng's lips twitch and Fu Yao's brows spasm. Shirlian raised his hand and said to Sanlang, It's nothing, don't worry. But next to him, Nanfeng shouted, Don't speak to him. What? Do you know each other? Shirlian asked again. No, Fu Yao said coldly. If you don't, then what are you? Before Shirlian could finish his sentence, he sensed lights flashing next to him. He looked back without giving it too much attention. The other two had produced balls of divine energy in their palms at the same time. An ill sense of foreboding overcame Shirlian, and he grabbed at them in alarm. Stop! Stop! Don't act rashly. The bulbs of divine energy were pulsing, staticky and dangerous. Definitely not something a normal person could make. Sanlang clapped a couple of times in polite appreciation. Amazing. Absolutely magical. It was truly the most insincere compliment. Shirlian finally caught Nanfeng and Fu Yao's arms to stop them from firing. Nanfeng turned to him angrily and questioned, Where did you meet him? What is his name? Where does he live? Where is he from? Why is he with you? Shirlian answered, We met on the road. His name is Sanlang. I don't know anything else, only that he has nowhere to go, so I let him stay. Will you two please stop? You... Nanfeng couldn't speak. It was as if he wanted to scream at Shirlian, but forcibly swallowed his words. You let him in, despite knowing nothing? Aren't you afraid that he might be scheming something? Why did Nanfeng's tone sound like his dad? If it was any other heavenly official, or another person, if they heard someone younger say anything in such a manner, they would have been displeased already. But first, Shirlian was already used to all kinds of rebukes and taunts, so he felt nothing. And second, he knew that those two meant well, and were only saying things out of worry, so he didn't mind. At this time, Sanlang cut in. Gurga, are they your servants? Shirlian replied warmly, The term servants isn't quite right. To be more precise, they should be helpers, I guess. Sanlang smiled back. Really? The youth stood up, grabbed an object, and threw it at Fu Yao. Then why don't you help out? Fu Yao didn't clearly see what was thrown at him before he caught it. Once it was in his hand and he saw what it was, his temper surged to his head. That boy threw him a broom. Fu Yao looked as if he wanted to crush both the broom and the teen into powder, and Shirlian hurriedly took the broom back from Fu Yao's hands. Calm down, I only have one broom. Before Shirlian could finish his words, he was cut off by a burst of white energy shot out from Fuyao's hand as he bellowed, "Reveal yourself." Sanlang stayed where he was, his arms still crossed in a relaxed posture, but tilted his head just slightly as the beam of energy narrowly missed him and smashed one of the altar table legs. The table collapsed with a loud crack, and all the plates crashed onto the floor in a heap. Shirlian rubbed his temple and thought that this had to stop. With the wave of his hand, he released Ruya and tied up Nanfeng and Fu Yao. Both men struggled, but they failed to break free. Nanfeng shouted, "What are you doing?" Shirlian made a gesture for a time out. "We'll talk outside." Then he waved his hand and Ruya flew out, dragging the two in tow. "I'll be right back," Shirlian said to Sanlang, and then closed the door behind him. At the front of the shrine, Shirlian called back Ruya and took the sign at the entrance and set it down in front of the two junior officials. "Read this, and then tell me what it says." Fuyao read aloud, "Please kindly donate to the renovation of the shrine for accumulation of good merit."
Hello.
He looked up
Hi.
at
Hi,
Shirlian.
Maxwell.
"Donations for renovations? You wrote this?"
Welcome
"You
to
are
the
at the very least an
stream.
ascended heavenly official.
How are you
How
doing?
could you write such a thing? Where's your dignity?" Shirlian nodded. "That's right. I wrote it. If you guys keep fighting inside, then I will be asking for donations for construction, not renovation. By then, I would have even less."
I am
Nanfeng
also
pointed
well.
to the shrine.
I guess I'm a
"Your
little bit
You don't
tired
think that
and my
boys
back
at least get
is
odd?
starting
Of course I
hurting,
do,"
so I'll
Shirlian said.
probably
"You know he's
start
dangerous, but you
wrapping
still
up
keep
the
him
stream
by your
soon.
side," Nanfeng demanded.
But for now,
Seeing that they had no intent
just
to donate, Shirlian placed the
doing
sign
stuff
back by
with
the door
it.
and replied, "Nanfeng, that's where you're wrong. There are all kinds of people with various temperaments and mannerisms in the world. Odd doesn't mean dangerous. Look at me. I'm odd in everyone's eyes. But do you think I'm dangerous?" Nanfeng really couldn't defy that logic.
I don't remember
Shirlian
how
clearly
I
had the
this
saintly look of an
implant.
immortal, and yet he still collected scraps all day. If he was not odd, then no one was odd. Fuyao said, "Aren't you afraid that he has ulterior motives?" He slowly asked, "Do you think that I have anything worth enough for him to scheme for?" Nanfeng and Fuyao were stumped. Indeed, schemes against another often were designed
We will
because a
figure
person was
something
coveting another's treasure.
out.
Tragically, they honestly couldn't think of anything
Okay.
belonging to Shirlian that was worth scheming for. He had no money.
I am
and no
doing
treasure. That boy couldn't
future,
be eyeing the junk that he collected every day, could he?
stickers and
Shirlian
button
continued.
pins
Besides,
with
it's not like I
Baldur's
haven't tested
Gate
him. The two junior officers
3
stared at him.
characters.
"How did you test him?"
And I am a little bit struggling
Shirlian
with
explained
Shadow
his
Heart
previous
for now,
The
but
results are inconclusive.
you know,
I've
we
already
are
told you.
kind of done with
If he
it.
isn't immortal,
We
then there's
only
only
need to
one
do
other possibility.
background
A
and some
supreme.
other.
Fuyao
Yeah,
said, "Who
I
knows?
already have
Maybe he is
Halsin,
a supreme."
Lae'zel, and
Shirlian
Gale.
said softly, "Do you think ghost kings are so idle like
They are
us
kind of like,
that
you know,
they'd come to a small
romance
place
based.
to
They have
collect
little
junk with
hearts and they're like
We aren't
cute and stuff.
Okay, okay.
Um,
On top of the small hill, outside
thank
the shrine,
you.
the three heavenly officials
I hope so.
could
They
hear the
look
sound
good.
of that
I mean,
team
they are for
moving
selling
easily
in
without
the
worry
future.
within the shrine.
And in the
As
future,
if
we
he
have
wasn't the least bit
Will,
worried
Carla,
over anything.
and
Nanfeng
Astarion.
said
Although
in a
I
low voice,
think I will
"No,
also
we still have to think of a
try
way to test if
to
he is
make
supreme."
a sketch. Give
Shirlian
me a
rubbed
second.
his
I will
forehead.
just turn
Go ahead.
off the audiobook because I am not listening to it anywhere while I'm talking. Mintara. But the problem with Mintara is I don't really know her well because in my both Baldur's Gate playthroughs, she died. Um, and all I know about Mintara is from TikTok videos about her. And yeah, maybe if I am going to do a Baldur's Gate evil playthrough, maybe I will get to know a little bit more about her. But well, for now she's kinda, my plans for later, I guess. So yeah. It's not planned. I don't really remember how I plan to do this. So this is barely seen. I'll think about it. The problem with making traditional sketches and then putting them in the digital is that I have no clue how I want it to look in the end, with the colors mostly. And yeah, now's this problem. And give me a second. Oh my god. That I added the artifact to it, and it's, well, in a bit reddish color, and it also glows, so it should cast a reddish light on a character. But I didn't plan it far ahead enough, so I had to add the red highlights, but I don't really like them, so I don't know if they will stay in the end, because I don't think people care enough about it. But also I would like to add this little stylized glow behind the artifact. I will try out a few colors, I guess. Where is the artifact? Oh, here's. I don't remember how it looked in the other. Up. Okay. So here we just add a I will grab my sketchbook. Oh my god. It is easier to see the actual sketch in front of you. And we can hide the artifact. Oh shit. Okay. Bum, ba-dum, bum. Okay. Oh shit. Anyway. No, 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 no. Doesn't love me. Okay. How did it look? Didn't plan it this far ahead, I guess. I'll just ask my friends later what they think looks best, and I think this is how I chose the background color for Lazel. I had two versions of it, and just asked my friends what they think looks best, and what they chose stayed. Okay. Please, dear Lord. Because if I would want, I think I would want here this part to be purple, and I hate the combination of red and purple. So that's why I'm wondering what color to do this little glow. Oh. Lord, give me. Oh. I don't remember if I took my testosterone this morning. Oh! My monitor is changing colors. Okay. Oh! But give me one more chance. See you, little village girl. See you. Alright, and now if I have this, I should add a glow behind the artifact. I wonder... Or maybe I would do the white. That's... Oh, I know what I will do. If we do it like this, and dun, 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 dun. I'm going back to the audiobook.
Yep. Go ahead and try. I'm dangerous. Look at me. I'm odd in everyone's eyes. But do you think I'm dangerous? Nanfeng really couldn't defy that logic. Shirlian clearly had the saintly look of an immortal, and yet he still collected scraps all day. If he was not odd, then no one was odd. Fuyao said, "Aren't you afraid that he has ulterior motives?" He slowly asked, "Do you think that I have anything worth enough for him to scheme for?" Nanfeng and Fuyao were stumped. Indeed, schemes against another often were designed because a person was coveting another's treasure. Tragically, they honestly couldn't think of anything belonging to Shirlian that was worth scheming for. He had no money and no treasure. That boy couldn't be eyeing the junk that he collected every day, could he? Shirley continued. Besides, it's not like I haven't tested him. The two junior officers stared at him. How did you test him? How did it go? Shirley explained his previous attempts. The results are inconclusive. I've already done so much. If he isn't immortal, then there's only one other possibility. A supreme. Fuyao sneered. Who knows? Maybe he is a supreme. Shirley said softly, do you think ghost kings are so idle like us that they'd come to a small village?
I don't like this.
We aren't idle. Okay. On top of the small hill, outside the shrine, the three heavenly officials could hear the sound of that teen moving easily without worry within the shrine, as if he wasn't the least bit worried over anything. Nanfeng said in a low voice, no, we still have to think of a way to test if he is a supreme. Shirley rubbed his forehead. Go ahead and try, but don't go overboard. What if he really does turn out to be a runaway young noble? I get along pretty well with this little friend, so be nice, don't bully him. The don't bully him made Nanfeng screw up his face.
Oh,
and
shit.
Fuyao's eyes rolled to the back of his head. Shirley nagged a bit more before reopening the door. Sanlang was checking out the broken table leg, and Shirley cleared his throat to get his attention. Are you all right? I'm all right. Just checking to see if we can fix this table leg. Everything just now was all a misunderstanding, so please don't mind them, Shirley said warmly. Since you say so, I won't mind. Maybe they thought that I looked familiar. Fuyao said frostily, yeah, quite familiar. Probably why I was mistaken. Sanlang grinned. What a coincidence. I think you two look rather familiar too. Although on high alert, Nanfeng and Fuyao were no longer reacting violently. Nanfeng said gloomily, make some room. I'm going to conjure a distance shortening array. The distance shortening array was a spell that could compress thousands of miles into one step, infinitely convenient. However, each use would consume a significant amount of power. Shirley rolled up the straw bedding mat on the ground and said, why don't you draw it here? With all the commotion earlier, Fuyao didn't have the chance to look at the shrine properly. Now that he had spent some time in the dilapidated shack, he looked around, feeling incredibly uncomfortable. He wrinkled his brows. You live in a place like this? Shirley grabbed a stool for him to sit and replied, I always live in places like these. Nanfeng paused briefly when he heard this, then went back to drawing the array. Fuyao didn't sit down, but his expression also turned complicated. He mostly looked surprised, but there was a tiny part that looked smug. He quickly neutralized this expression. Where's the bed? He asked. This is it, Shirley replied, hugging his straw mat. Nanfeng looked up to glance at the mat, then lowered his head again. Fuyao side-eyed Sanlang, who was standing aside. You two are sleeping next to each other? Is there a problem? Shirley asked pointedly. Finally, Nanfeng and Fuyao couldn't come up with anything else to say, so no more problems. Shirley turned to Sanlang to continue their earlier conversation. Sorry, we were interrupted before. Sanlang, what's going on at Banyue? Please tell. Sanlang had been staring at them earlier, looking to be deep in thought, his eyes dark, and had only just snapped out of it when he heard Shirley call to him. He gave Shirley a small smile. All right. Sanlang sorted his thoughts, then spoke. The ghost of Banyue was the Gosher of the ancient kingdom of Banyue, one of the dual wicked masters. Dual means that there's two of them. Who's the other one? Shirley asked. Sanlang, having all the answers, replied. Another wicked cultivator from the Midlands named Fang Xin. Shirley widened his eyes, but didn't say anything and continued to listen. Turns out the people of Banyue were a brutish warrior race who frequently enjoyed invading nearby lands. They seized an important checkpoint between the Midlands and the West region, and the two countries constantly fought over the border. Battles, skirmishes, the conflicts were never ending. Their Gorsha was learned in the demonic arts, and the soldiers of Banyue trusted in it with all their hearts, willing to follow after the Gorsha until the ends of the earth. However, 200 years ago, a dynasty from the Midlands finally dispatched an army to invade and leveled the kingdom of Banyue. Although the kingdom of Banyue was annihilated, the resentment of the Gorsha and the soldiers would not disperse, and they remained behind to haunt the place. The kingdom of Banyue was built upon an oasis, but after its fall, it was as if the aura of evil permeated and rotted through the greenery. Soon it was swallowed by the Gobi Desert. Some say they still saw shadows of Banyue warriors, giant and terrifying, with maces in hand, patrolling what was once the gates of Banyue. Thousands of civilians who used to live there gradually migrated, unable to make a living in a dying oasis. This was when the rumors of disappearing travelers started to spread. All those who had come from the Midlands wishing to pass through must leave behind half of their assets as a toll: human lives. Fuya smiled without mirth. This young master sure knows a lot. Sun Lung smiled back. It's nothing. You just don't know very much. That's all. Shirlian snorted in spite of himself, amused by Sun Lung's sharp tongue. Sun Lung continued lazily. This is just based on unofficial history and ancient records of strange supernatural occurrences. Who knows if the Gorsha of Banyue is real? Maybe the kingdom of Banyue doesn't even exist. Even though it's rogue records that you've read and rumors that you've heard, the kingdom of Banyue certainly exists, Shirlian said. Oh yeah? Sun Lung hummed. Just then, Nanfen completed the array on the ground and called out to the others in the room. It's done. When shall we go? Shirlian quickly packed a small bag and came to the door. Let's go now. He placed his hand on the door and recited, by the heaven official's blessing, no paths are bound. Then gently pushed. When the door was pushed open, there was no longer a small hillside village outside. What replaced it now was a wide city avenue. As wide as the streets were, there was barely anyone on the road, maybe one or two pedestrians every now and then. This wasn't because it was late in the evening, but because the population in the far northwest was already small, on top of being this close to the Gobi Desert. Even in broad daylight, there wouldn't be many walking about. Shirlian closed the door behind him, and it was no longer Pucci Shrine on the inside, but a small inn. This one step certainly was over thousands of miles, the miracle of the distance-shortening array. A couple of pedestrians walked by, staring at them and whispering to themselves, appearing quite guarded. Sun Lung spoke up from behind Shirlian. According to historical records, when the moon sinks in the sky, follow the North Star, and you will come upon the kingdom of Banyue. Gurgur, look. Sun Lung pointed to the sky. There's the Polaris. Shirlian looked up and smiled. It's so bright. Sun Lung stepped closer to stand beside Shirlian, took a glance at him, then looked up too. Yeah, it seems the night sky in the northwest is somehow more vast than the Midlands. Shirlian agreed, and the two became immersed in a discussion on stars and night skies. Meanwhile, the two junior officials behind them watched on in disbelief. Nanfeng questioned, why is he here too? The door you created looked so magical, I followed along to check it out, Sun Lang replied innocently. Check it out? Do you think that this is a tour? Nan Feng shouted angrily. Shilian rubbed his forehead and said, Let it go. Since he's here, then he's here. He won't eat your rations. I should have enough. Sun Lang, stay close to me. Don't get lost. Okay, Sun Lang responded, looking obedient and good. This isn't a question of rations, Nan Feng said. Shilian sighed. Nan Feng, please keep it down. It's the middle of the night. Everyone is sleeping. Let's just focus on the task at hand and stop sweating the small stuff. Let's go. The four followed the North Star and traveled northward. After walking non-stop for an entire night, the towns and greenery along the way became more and more sparse, and the ground slowly gave way to sand. Finally, they reached the Gobi Desert. Although the distance-shortening array could cross over thousands of miles in one step, it used an exhaustive amount of power. The further one went, the more power it sapped, and the time it took to restore power also lengthened. This one step Nan Feng helped them take would require at least several hours to recover from. To conserve strength in case of unforeseen battle, Shilian decided not to have Fu Yao perform the same conjuring. For a journey such as this, someone must have their powers at full strength. In desert climate, the difference between night and day was extreme. The nights were freezing to the bone, but not too bad. When it became day, it was another story. The sky was clear and cloudless, giving way to a scorching sun. It was as if they were walking in a steaming oven, cooking them alive from the ground. Shilian led the way, using the direction of the wind and small vegetation growing under boulders to find their path. After a while, he looked back, worried that someone may not be able to keep up. Nan Feng and Fu Yao were obviously fine, seeing that they were immortal. Sun Lang, though, made him laugh. Under the blazing sun, the youth had peeled off his outer red tunic and was using it to lazily block off the sun, looking tired and cranky. His skin was pearl white, his hair coal black, and with the red tunic covering his face, his features seemed even more accentuated. Shilian removed his bamboo hat and put it on Sun Lang's head. Here, I'll lend it to you. Surprised, Sun Lang laughed and said, It's all right, and returned the hat to Shilian. Shilian didn't argue. If the boy didn't need it, then there was no need to push. Let me know if you need it then, Shilian said. He straightened the hat on his head and continued walking. After a while, the group noticed a small grey building in the midst of all the sand. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be an abandoned inn. Shilian looked to the sky, seeing that it was just past noon and time for the worst of the heat. They had walked all night, and it was time for a break. Shilian led the group inside, and they found a table to sit at and settle. From his bag, Shilian took out a water bottle and handed it to Sun Lang. Do you want some? Sun Lang nodded. He reached for the water bottle and drank from it, before Shilian took it back to drink himself. He gulped down the cool water, his Adam's apple rolling up and down, feeling incredibly refreshed and energized. Next to him, Sun Lang had his arm propping up his chin, stealing glances as Shilian drank. A moment later, he asked, Is there any more? Shilian wiped away the last bit of water that was caught on his moistened lips, then nodded and passed the water bottle over again. Sun Lang was about to reach for it when another hand blocked him from the water bottle in Shilian's grasp. Hold on, Fu Yao said. He retrieved his own water bottle from his sack and put it on the table, pushing it toward Sun Lang. I have one too. Shilian immediately knew what he was planning. Knowing Fu Yao's personality, there was no way he would ever share his water bottle. He and Nan Feng were talking about testing Sun Lang the night before, so the liquid in the bottle must be unmasking water. If a normal human was to drink a potion such as this, then nothing would happen. However, If they were anything but human, the unmasking water would force its drinker to reveal their true form. Since Nanfeng and Fu Yao wanted to test to see if this youth was a supreme, then the effects of this potion must be considerable. Sanlang smiled. Gurga and I can share one bottle. It's fine. Fu Yao and Nanfeng eyed Shirlian, and Shirlian thought, what are you both staring at me for? Fu Yao said coldly, his is almost empty. There's no need to be so polite. Really? Then you two drink first. Don't worry about me, Sanlang said. Those two both fell silent. A moment later, Fu Yao tried again. You're a guest. You go first. Fu Yao sounded polite and well-mannered, but Shirlian thought that he must have squeezed those words out from between his teeth. Sanlang also made a gesture of welcome. You two are followers of the host. Please drink first, otherwise it'd be indecent of me. Shirlian watched the three of them play the silly game of false pleasantries and pitied the sad water bottle being roughly pushed around the table. He shook his head. He could feel the poor table tremble from the power play and feared it may not have long to live. Finally, Fu Yao snapped and sneered. You not accepting this water means that you have a guilty conscience. Sanlang replied with a smile. You're unfriendly and refused to drink first. Who knows if you've poisoned the water? Maybe you're the ones with a guilty conscience. Fu Yao pointed at Shirlian. You can very well ask him whether this water is poisoned. Is this water poisoned, Gurga? Sanlang turned to Shirlian. It was quite the cunning question. Technically, the unmasking water was a potion that exposed one's true form and didn't harm real people. Shirlian replied slowly. It's not poisoned, but... Fu Yao and Nanfeng focused their glare on Sanlang, and he surprisingly let go of his grip on the bottle. All right. Sanlang grabbed the bottle and shook it playfully in his hand. If Gurga says that it's okay, then there's no problem. He gulped down the contents of the bottle in one go. Shirlian didn't think he'd be so straightforward and was quite shocked. Nanfeng and Fu Yao were stunned too and tensed immediately. Yet who knew? After Sanlang drank all of that unmasking water, he shook the bottle again, then threw it over his shoulder, where it crashed and shattered. Tastes bad, he said. Shock flashed across Fu Yao's face when he saw that the unmasking water did nothing to Sanlang. A moment later, he said impassively, It's only water. What difference is there? Sanlang reached for the water bottle next to Shirlian's elbow and replied, Of course it's different. This one tastes much better. Shirlian chuckled. Sanlang really didn't care for any challenges going his way, nor did he care about his true identity. So other than entertainment, this fight was meaningless. Shirlian thought that this would be the end of it, but Nanfeng stood up and dropped the sword onto the table with a loud clang. With such a strong battle aura surrounding him, at first Shirlian thought that Nanfeng intended to end Sanlang for good and was speechless for a moment. What are you doing? Shirlian asked. The road ahead is dangerous, Nanfeng stated in a low voice. This is a gift for the little buddy, for self-defense. The sheath of the sword was ancient in design and bore wear and tear from the ages. It was no ordinary sword. Shirlian's eyes widened in recognition. He put his hand on his forehead and turned away. He muttered to himself, It's Hong Jing. The name of the sword was indeed Hong Jing. This sword was a sacred sword. While it could not fight evil, no evil could escape its spiritual mirror. Should any non-human entities pull it from its sheath, then the blade would turn red as if covered in blood, and the crimson blade would reflect the true form of that which unsheathed it. Whether you were a savage or a supreme, none shall escape. There were no young men who would not be interested in swords or horses, so Sanlang appeared rather excited. Ooh, let me see.
And what if I do like...
Sheath in one hand, hilt in the other. Sanlang pulled at the sword. Nanfeng and Fu Yao stared intently, but when merely 3 inches of the sword was pulled out, Sun Lang laughed. "Gurgur, are your servants playing a joke on me?" he asked. Julian cleared his throat and turned back around. "Sun Lang, I already said that they are not servants." He then turned around again. "Who's joking around with you?" Nanfeng said coldly. "How can one self-defend with a broken sword?" Sun Lang sheathed the sword and threw it back onto the table.
Oh,
Nanfeng's face froze for a moment. Then he immediately picked up the sword to check. He pulled it out of the sheath and heard a clunk, and suddenly, in his hand, was now a sharp and chilling broken sword. Hongjing was broken from 3 inches down. Nanfeng's face changed colors, and he turned the sheath upside down. There was a clattering sound of a mess of clinks and clanks. What was left of the blade within the sheath was now broken into bright and sharp little fragments. The Hongjing sword was a powerful weapon that could expose its enemies, but Nanfeng had never heard of any technique that could break it from within the sheath. Nanfeng and Fu Yao both pointed at Sun Lang and cried, "You!" Sun Lang snickered and threw himself back into his chair. He pushed back and put his feet up on the table, then tossed one of the broken pieces in his hand in the air to play. "I'm sure you guys didn't do this on purpose, and just weren't careful enough with it on the road. Don't worry about me. I don't need some broken sword as protection. Keep it for yourselves." As for Shirlian, he simply couldn't look at Hongjing directly. The sacred sword used to be part of the collection of Junwu, the martial heavenly emperor. During his first ascension, Shirlian once visited Junwu's palace and thought, despite its lack of combat power, Hongjing was an interesting sword, so Junwu had gifted it to him. After the first banishment, there was a time when things had gotten really difficult, and Shirlian gave the sword to function to be pawned. That's right, pawn. Money made from pawning Hongjing was enough to fill their stomachs for a number of meals. Shirlian had pawned off too many treasures during that time, and he had forced himself to forget every single one of them, lest his heart bleed with regret. Feng Shen remembered the sword after his ascension, and couldn't bear having a sacred sword lost amongst mortals, so he found it again. It was sharpened, cleaned, and hung in the palace of Nanyang, and now it was brought down by Nanfeng. In any case, whenever Shirlian saw that sword, he'd feel a dull pain and could only look away. He could sense that the other 3 were about to start bickering again, and shook his head, instead carefully observing the weather outside. The wind was picking up, Shirlian noted. There might be a sandstorm later on. Should they continue on? Would they be able to find shelter? Just then, over the golden sand, 2 shadows suddenly flashed by. Shirlian straightened up immediately. 2 silhouettes, one black and one white, strolled unhurriedly but rapidly, as if they were gliding through the clouds. The one dressed in black was slender and elegant. The one in white, on the other hand, was a female cultivator, a sword on her back and a whisk in hand. As they sped by the abandoned inn, the black figure never looked back once, but the white figure glanced over and smiled in the flash of a moment. It was forebodingly creepy. It was only because Shirlian had been keeping an eye on the outside that he caught that scene, but the other 3 probably only saw their retreating backs. Nanfeng stopped his bickering instantly and rose. Who was that? "I don't know, but they're not ordinary people," Shirlian replied, and stood up too. "The wind is picking up. Stop playing around and let's go as far as we can." Although the bickering trio constantly argued, they had nevertheless steeled their hearts to do what they came out to do. So they immediately cleaned up the pieces of Hongjing before heading out the door. The 4 of them continued their trek, now against a blowing headwind. They walked for another 4 hours, wind howling in their ears, but the leeway they made was incomparable to the same distance that they were able to cover earlier in the day. The whipping gusts grew stronger, throwing sand in their faces and bodies, beating at any uncovered skin. The more they advanced, the more difficult it became. Gusts became deafening gales, and whirling sand wrapped the air around them, blinding their path. Shirlian, holding his bamboo hat down, called out, "The sandstorm doesn't feel right." No one answered him, and Shirlian looked back, afraid that someone might be lost. But all three were present and following him. It's just that no one had heard him. The gales were so strong, his voice was swallowed up. He wasn't particularly worried about Nanfeng and Fu Yao. Even with the crazed winds whipping, the two walked steadily, full of killing intent. Sun Lung, on the other hand, followed closely behind Shirlian, never more than 5 steps away. Even with so much sand blowing and thrashing about, Sun Lung remained calm and collected, his arms folded behind him as he walked. His red tunic and black hair danced wildly in the wind, as if he hadn't any care in the world. Shirlian could feel how hard the sand was hitting his face, and was worried by how little Sun Lung seemed to mind. He opened his mouth to tell the youth to watch out for sand getting in his eyes and sleeves, but figured that he wouldn't be able to hear him, so Shirlian reached over directly to help fold in his sleeves, patting down to make sure that no sand would get in. Sun Lung was taken aback by the sudden gesture. The other two behind them approached, and with everyone close and within better hearing range, Shirlian tried talking again. "Be careful, everyone. This wind came out of nowhere. It's not right. There may be evil blown into this." "It's just a little sandstorm. How evil can it be?" Fu Yao asked. Shirlian shook his head. "The wind is all right. There may be more sand in the gusts, though." Just then, a powerful gust whipped by, blowing off Shirlian's bamboo hat. If it flew off, it would disappear in the desert forever. But Sun Lung reacted immediately and grabbed the hat in time with an abnormally fast hand. He returned the bamboo hat to Shirlian once more, and Shirlian thanked him. Shirlian retied the hat onto his head before saying, "We should probably find shelter for the time being." Fu Yao disagreed. "If there's evil in the storm trying to stop us from advancing, then we must continue." Before Shirlian could say anything, Sun Lung burst out laughing. Fu Yao raised his head and asked coldly, "What are you laughing at?" Sun Lung folded his arms and chuckled. "Does being subversive give you the satisfaction of feeling unique and independent?" Shirlian had always thought that it was hard to tell when Sun Lung's laughs were sincere, but this time there was definitely not a single trace of sincerity. Fu Yao's eyes grew dark, and Shirlian raised his hand to stop another impending argument. "Stop right there, you two. If you've got things to say, you can say them later. It wouldn't be funny if the wind blows stronger." "What, think it'll blow you away?" Fu Yao mocked. "That may very well help." Shirlian didn't even finish his sentence before the three in front of him suddenly vanished. Actually, they weren't the ones who vanished, but rather he did. Another powerful gust had carried him away for real, a twister. Shirlian spun madly in the sky. He threw out his arm and cried, "Ruya, grab hold of something dependably solid." Ruya shot out from within Shirlian's sleeve, and in the next moment he could feel the other end of the white bandage sink, as if it was tied onto something, and it yanked him to a stop. After finally stabilizing himself in the crazed wind, Shirlian realized that he had been blown over 10 feet above ground. Shirlian was now like a kite, attached to the ground by only a single thread. With sand whipping at his face, Shirlian held fast and tried to see exactly what Ruya had tied itself to. Squinting and blinking, Shirlian finally recognized a red silhouette. The other end of Ruya seemed to be wrapped around the wrist of the youth in red. Shirlian had told Ruya to grab hold of something dependably solid, and it had grabbed onto Sun Lung.
That's good.
Shirley didn't know whether to laugh or cry and was about to command Roya to grab onto something else when the weight on his arm suddenly became lighter. Shirley's heart sank. This wasn't the feeling of Roya being released, but something much worse. Sure enough, the red silhouette suddenly grew closer and was soon within reach. Sunlung had been dragged into the windstorm too. Shirley shouted, "Don't panic," but the moment he opened his mouth, he got another mouthful of sand. At this point, Shirley had gotten used to eating sand. He was trying to tell Sunlung not to panic, but in all honesty, he didn't think the boy would panic in the slightest. Roya continued to withdraw back to Shirley, closing the distance between him and the boy who had just been blown into the sky. As he suspected, Sunlung didn't look the least bit anxious, appearing as if he could calmly open up a book and read right there and then. Shirley wondered if Sunlung had gotten dragged in on purpose. Roya wrapped itself around the waists of the two to rope them together. Shirley then commanded, "Go, try again, but don't bring up any more people." The silk band shot out once again, but this time it had grabbed onto Nanfeng and Fu Yao. Shirley felt drained. "Roya," he said tiredly, "I said no people, but I didn't mean it so literally, all right?" Shirley twisted himself toward the ground and shouted, "Nanfeng, Fu Yao, hang on tight." Down below, Nanfeng and Fu Yao did their utmost to try and anchor themselves, but the winds were simply too strong, and soon, without any surprise, another two silhouettes joined them in the twister. Now all four of them were tied together by Roya. They were swirling about in the twister, getting pulled higher and higher off the ground, winds and sand meshing and blowing about. "How did you both get blown up here too?" Shirley shouted, enduring all the sand going into his mouth. "Ask your dumb Roya," Fu Yao yelled back, also getting mouthfuls of sand as he spat out those words. Shirley seized his dumb Roya with both hands and said woefully, "My dear Roya, all four of us are counting on you now. Please don't grab the wrong thing again. Now go." Shirley miserably released Roya once more. "Stop relying on that toy. Think of something else," Nanfeng roared. But just then, Shirley felt a tug from the other end of the silk band and lit up. "Wait, give it one more chance. It's caught something." "It better not be a random passerby. Let the poor person go," Fu Yao roared. Shirley was also afraid of the same thing. He tugged back at Roya, but it remained taut and firm, and Shirley let out a breath of relief. "It's not. It's something solid, quite stable." Then he commanded Roya, "Pull." Against the crazed twister, Roya rapidly shortened and dragged the four of them out of and then away from the windstorm. Gradually, Shirley could make out the contours of something large, black, and half-round down below, the size of a small temple. When they finally touched the ground, Shirley saw that this round structure was actually a giant boulder. In the midst of the windstorm, this boulder was like a fortress, the perfect shelter. While on the road earlier, none of them had seen a rock like this. Who knew how far the twister had taken them? When they landed, they immediately circled around to the back of the boulder to hide from the wind. The moment they went around, understanding dawned on Shirley. He cheered. Thank the heaven officials' blessings. It turned out that behind the boulder there was a hole. The hole was as wide as 2 doors combined, but the length of half a person. Although a bit short, it was still possible to enter if one bent down. The hole's opening was jagged and slant, but appeared to be more haphazardly man-made rather than naturally formed. When Shirley entered, he discovered that the inside was actually hollowed out and quite deep.
I'm going sleep.
It was dark further.
Oh, my